on my agenda.
It's okay. Clean it up. Get it, I think we get it down to the page. How are you doing?
Ran into Satan this morning.
Oh yeah?
Sure did. What do you think? I really love you. Students each year. Yeah. So I was up there for a conference.
It's already. It's going to send you a copy. You don't have to wait. It's going to send you a copy.
Good luck with
Argue bagel. Just green just go back.
Good. Thank you both.
I love it. Yeah, I was going to say sorry.
I wonder where James is.
I think it's
Oh, there you go. There's my answer. Just text you. John, I'm a few months later. I mean, thank you.
yeah, no. Close to the business, right?
He just sent me a text indicating he's going to be a few minutes late, so I think we should wait on him. Well, actually, we've got a form. We can go ahead and start, and he can just join in on the agenda item. Is that okay? All right, good. Is it 4:30? I wouldn't wait till it's technically 4:30. More seconds. Okay, sure. You're drinking out of the Petra. Well, that's what I was trying to figure out too. Okay. Lawrence, ready? Yes, we are. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the September 14th, 2022 BAR large in-person meeting at the Public Meeting Room, the Lenny Krawcheck Room at 2 George Street. My name is John Robinson. I'm the chairman for this evening's proceedings. The other board members present with me today are Jay White, who will be recusing on agenda items 3 and 6. Lou Sobchuk, who will recuse on agenda item number 6. James Meadows will be with us in just a minute, and Stephen Brown. City staff present are Torrey Parrish and Lawrence Courtney. The order of the meeting will be as follows. There will first be an introduction and overview of any given project by city staff to the board and the benefit of the public. This is then followed by an application presentation period, which has a 10-minute time limit unless extended by the chair, and that can be supplemented by any and all questions asked by the board or staff. Any and all presenters need to state their name for the record and then state how they are affiliated with that project, be they the owner, developer, designer, architect, consultant, etc. They should speak at this time rather than the later public comment period. The applicant's presentation is followed by the written public comment. Written comments have been due the day before noon on Tuesday, the day before our meeting. They are transmitted to the board members electronically as soon as possible thereafter. Unless determined necessary by the chairman, they are not read into the record because of time constraints, but they are considered by the board. This is followed by a live public comment period in which any member present this evening may speak for a 2-minute time limit or with reasonable extensions granted by the chair. The applicant does not respond to any public comments made during this period. The same rule applies for any member of the public. They need to clearly state their name and address to the record. This is followed by the city staff comments and recommendations period. This is followed by the applicant's response or clarification period in which they may address either public comments or city staff comments, rebut any incorrect information that's in the record. 5-minute rule applies to this rebuttal period. The applicant then takes a seat and only speaks if called upon by the board or staff. This is followed by a board discussion and a vote on each agenda item. The applicant presentation, public comment, and other questioning is generally closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising their hand and waiting to be called. No agenda items have been withdrawn. Looks like we're going to have a pretty long, steady evening. No predictions on getting us out of here early. This is a reminder to both board, staff, and public to please silence cell phones or any other potentially disruptive devices. This is also a particularly pertinent reminder this evening, perhaps for some members of the public who have not had the pleasure of joining us before. This board's purview is architecture and aesthetics only. Comments related to zoning, such as parking concerns, traffic concerns, lot coverage, and livability concerns, are not the legal purview of this board and therefore cannot be voiced here. A little more board protocol. We've talked to you about meeting participation. We are being recorded live as this is a meeting covered by South Carolina's FOIA laws. It's being recorded on the YouTube live stream, and we have an audience on YouTube as well. As I mentioned, written public comment had to be presented before at noon yesterday to be considered by us. The means of contacting us are shown on the screen. The citizens participation form, calling 724-3781, or using snail mail, obviously well in advance, by sending your comments to this department at 2 George Street. Lawrence, we have you see the object there. Procedurally, we'll appreciate everyone bearing with us tonight. The size and scale of the presentations in terms of the data size of the files is such that Lawrence is going to be switching back and forth between 4 data packets and a few videos. So your patience while we work through that is appreciated, even though Lawrence is very deft and adept at it. Ms. Parrish, I guess we have as agenda item number 1, approval of last month's meeting notes, correct? The August 24, 2022 meeting. Can I entertain a motion for the board to approve the minutes as published?
I make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as published. Agenda item number 2, 678 and 666 King Street.
What you had before you previously. We've got some context slides showing the location. And then some context imagery of what's on the property right now. This is adjacent to F Street. B Street.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Fessler with McMillan Hassan Smith Architecture. Also have Robinson Villa here with NEG. He is the developer of the project as well. So we presented this project about a month ago to the board, and we received some comments that we feel like we've addressed, and we're going to kind of walk through those. I think it'll take a little bit more time than normal. I could request a 5-minute extension.
Sure, 15 minutes total.
So the primary comments we got last time related to the appropriateness of the building, the character, the sameness of some of the other similar buildings, and most prominently was the relationship of the cornice as it's visible from the elevated height. So those are the things we're going to primarily focus in on today, since I think this board has seen the project before. So we'll focus on those items primarily. But if there's questions on any other items, we can certainly answer them. So next, please. I want to fast forward through some of these early site plan photos and just move to the site plan quickly. So as a reminder, it's 100% affordable housing. It's a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom studio apartments behind the housing authority's property, but there are a few improvements on the housing authority's property as well as in the DOT property under the fence. In that area, we presented our design intent for that area, but understand that property is primarily under a DRC. But we certainly welcome the comments this board has to move that. Next, please. Back up one more quick one. So, recent buildings that are relatively close by to this project in the city of Charleston are presented on this page here. So they're comparable in terms of their height. They're all about 5 stories, similar to this building. The reason we bring these up is there were comments at the last meeting about our building having a similar effect or similar design to some of these, and that our site and our particular building needs to be more prominent, as some of the board members have said, that they view this site as a gateway to the city. So with that effect, our building, these buildings are all fine buildings. Ours, I think, in some ways, is a little bit more interesting in the fact that we really break down the massing a little bit more in terms of planes, and that's a revision from the last time, a little bit more planar on some of the brick components. And then also, these buildings are primarily viewed as one mass. There's some trickery involved with the upper story, cornices, caps, things like that. But I think our building's a little bit different in the massing. Next, please. The other thing we want to address in this is related to that, being appropriate for the city of Charleston in the immediate context. So previously we focused in on complementing the color of the building with the green, which relate to the bright colors of the housing authority projects, which are adjacent. With this revised submittal, we also looked at some other elements of our immediate context, which consist of a pretty vibrant area of street art, particularly to the south, immediate south to this site. So here's a few examples of what that looks like. There's no prominent style, but they're all very unique and engaging. Next, please. This slide here shows on the left is our previous submittal. On the right is our more current submittal. So this primarily focuses on the cornice of the 5th level portion, which is the most visible from the overpass. So we have taken 2 feet of height out of it, and we have also simplified it. We've removed the more traditional cornice profile, and we've tried to incorporate the consistent language of the channels at the balconies, the entry canopies, to be a more cohesive whole. Next, please. This is a view from there with the immediate context. Next, please. Approach from King Street. Next, please. As you get in closer to the building, there's a glimpse of the street art in that narrow swath in between the 4-story and 5-story component, as well as the primary wall that you see entering the city. You get a glimpse of that up from the business story portion. Next, please. This view shows a little bit how we've expanded on the planar language of the building. Previously, only the plain language was expressed at the end components of the building. We wanted to make that a little bit stronger, so the brick components that were more of a C shape in the middle of the building and other bays, we've revised those to be more of an L shape. So one edge of that kind of exposes that plane and creates a little bit more depth in the color change there. Next, please. Another view. Next, please. View of the ground. We made a good effort to really engage the public at the ground with atypical from your normal apartment buildings. Everyone at the ground level has a porch to enter. Next, please. View from the courtyard area. You can see a little bit a glimpse of the street art. Next, please. Another view from the low line. Next, please. Another view from the low line. So one of the other comments we got at the previous board meeting was that our design for our building and kind of bled into the branding of how the low line park system is being developed. This time we're showing a clear intent that they're supposed to be complementary, but they're going to be different color palettes, different styles, so that the low line park has its own identity that's complemented by our project. Next, please. View the entry. Next, please. Another approach view. Next, please. You can see that the low line park system column entry columns in our building listed background. Next, please. All right. So the primary discussion last time was how this building will. The general impression of the comments we received was that it was favorable at the ground level. At the upper level, there was more concern. So that's where we're focusing. So this view here represents the first view you will see of this project as you enter the city. So a good portion of it is obscured by a billboard that kind of command your attention, and then the distant view of what built now in Charleston, and there will be additional buildings built directly ahead of you as well. Next, please. This is the view as you pass the building on the side. You get a glimpse of two of the street art components, the simpler cornice that kind of hints at the character of the neighborhood that you're passing by. So that's some of the intent there. Next, please. This is the view as you pass this building from the rear. Next, please. And another view from Elevated Highway area. Next, please. Please. I think if you could move forward to A300, Morrison, I think that's the next one we want to talk about. It's in color axonometric drawing. So this is the last image we want to show you, and then we want to switch to some movies so you can see this. Drawings give you one perception of what the building is. Motion is another component. So we want to make sure that that's clear as you evaluate how the building is developed. But this drawing here kind of shows the main themes of the things we worked on addressing. We simplified the cornice. We've simplified some of the brick reveals. We've developed the planar language a little bit clearer. We've added more components that are compelling and complementary to the immediate context of the building, primarily being in the street art. And we unified the language of the cornice with the balconies and entrance cabinets. And then we'd like to switch to the animation. So there'll be three animations. One is approaching the city, one is leaving the city, and one is one that you're more of flying above the road, which I know the board typically only wants to experience what you are at the ground, but to truly appreciate what the building looks like. So the roadway, in my opinion, doesn't give you an accurate picture of this project. So this is approaching the city. Buildings on the right. Downtown's straight ahead. I'll explain also the brick we're proposing and the siding panels and colors are also down here. The primary field is the more rustic brick, and then the smoother one is only for the steps and brick sills. This is the view as you're heading north next to Charleston. The building is on the left. And the third and final video is in elevate view, which isn't the perception the average person would see, but it makes it very clear to see the areas we've developed as street art, where the brick planes are, those components we talked about, the simplified cornice. Thank you. That concludes our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. Public comment on this agenda item.
Airmen Preservation Society of Charleston. First, we want to reiterate our strong support for this project's program as providing much needed affordable housing in downtown. This design has come a long way, and we appreciate the project team responding to our comments and the board's direction. However, we continue to struggle with the neon green accents, which are in strong contrast with the context. It's not clear if the murals depicted in the renderings are the exact design being proposed, but we are concerned they will have a similarly jarring appearance, especially as you enter the city from I-26. We are not opposed to providing visual interest at the top of the building through artwork, but feel this particular proposal is not appropriate and should be restudied and softened to relate to Charleston's architectural character.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Further public comment on this agenda item? No, city staff. Oh, sorry.
So I always struggle whether I'm the public because I'm city as well. So anyway, good afternoon. I'm Gianna Shaw Johnson. I'm the director for the city's Department of Housing and Community Development. Thank you all for your service. We appreciate all the work that NHE and their team have done to answer the questions and the challenges that you all posed to them relative to the design of this project. We ask your support of it. I recognize that you all don't think about cost, nor do you think about low-income housing tax credits and all that go in to make these deals feasible. But I would just admonish you to give us a decision of yes tonight so that we can move this forward successfully. We are all aware of the challenges related to affordable housing in our community. This will help answer that question, and we thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Further public comment on this agenda item? Going once? Hearing none. City staff.
Some comments, staff comments. Number one, recent revisions include a lowering of and a simplification of the detailing of the parapets, resolving with something cleaner and more in tune with the overall design language. Related to some prior board perspective of the proposed building as a gateway building, especially from the elevated highway, The project will certainly occupy a unique location. However, the newly provided perspectives indicate the building to be more of a peripheral building. In this position, the many planes, edges, steps, and interactions on the proposed will provide a frontage that is both interesting and respectful of this unique location. 2 brick colors are proposed with elements such as the window sills and headers utilizing the darker brick. I think I've got that right. Staff is neutral with no concern on either color, but not overly supportive of 2 brick colors for the building. 4, BAR staff is supportive of public art and or graphics, but suggests that the design of the graphic panels, unless approved tonight, be considered murals and reviewed separately at a later date, considering these to be placeholders. And last, BAR staff maintained the concern over the green tone proposed in the images. At conceptual review, it was determined that the color and tone would be reviewed as part of a mock-up panel. Staff is equally concerned about some of the colors and tones used in the graphic panels, finding a muting or neutralizing of these to be necessary and appropriate. The staff recommendation is preliminary approval with board and staff comments. Alternatively, if the board is comfortable with staff handling the color guidance and the board separately reviewing the graphics package, final approval with board and staff comments and a final review by staff of 4 permit drawings.
Thank you, Mrs. Parrish. Applicant response.
I do just want to clarify the murals are placeholders. This was confusion over that. The intent was that it would be complementary in color scheme to what the green ends up being, or if it's an alternate color to what it is. But they'd be complementary. That's all I need to add to that.
Thank you. All right. Board discussion and a vote.
Well, I'll kick this one off, and I appreciate the adjustments y'all made to the architectural language of the project and understanding the context in which it's being built. The murals caught my eye because I remember another major project not too far from here that was reliant on a mural to solve an architectural problem. That was the Charleston Tech Center garage, the west facade of it. It was intended to have a mural from one end to the other, but no one really thought about how expensive it would be to paint a mural larger than a football field. And so now we have what we have. I think there's a fantastic opportunity with those murals to say something really positive, really something intentional about Charleston, especially the Upper Peninsula. I do think it should be handled separately, but I do think there should also be some understanding, even baked into whatever reasons forward, that these will be decorated surfaces, painted surfaces, muralized surfaces. Because what happened to the Tech Center is really unfortunate. They couldn't afford the mural, so they tried to sub it out with a form liner on the concrete that ended up being too light to be legible. But otherwise, I think the project's moving in a good direction.
Further board comments?
I will eliminate my comments about the cards since that's just a placeholder. I think what catches me about the green color is the way that you stated it. It is, and I might not get this exactly right, but the green color is an extension of the character of the neighborhood. So that green color is coming up. So what we see is we're coming on the interstates being driven by what the house color are, or the apartment colors are that are down on the ground. That's the way it reads. I appreciate the changes that have been made also. Appreciate your commitment to the project. I always appreciate Ms. Johnson and everything she does for the city. Her commitment to everything. Mr. Chairman, I got one more thing, but
Sure.
I gotta think about what we're saying. I continue to think the view from the ground is engaging. I'm uncomfortable with that green color as it extends above the interstate, which means I guess I'm uncomfortable with it overall. But I'm comfortable with the overall project. Supporter of the overall project. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an appropriate statement for preliminary review, and I can detect that's where some of our board members are. Just briefly, I would say ditto to what James has said. I personally find that particular shade of green, not the color green, but that particular shade of green a little jarring. And we've heard that from several people now. We can fix that aesthetic issue. It is this chairman's view that is not something that has to be nailed down in preliminary review, and I think probably would benefit along with the mural package of being broken out. and having the understanding that it does in fact need to be installed, as Mr. White has raised. It does not need to be cost engineered out at a later date. I think that's something that staff can stay on top of. Further, and I also agree that the aesthetics of the building itself have improved tremendously. Your idea of having planes that are more substantial bears that out, and the color, whatever the color is, the contrasting color, I think will help highlight that, and it's a stronger proposal. I hope the applicant feels that it's a strong proposal through this process. Further board comment?
There's no need to reiterate what's been said because I agree with everything. I do would like to see a mural package separately and color be considered. But I also want to thank the applicant in particular for providing the context videos, being able to understand what we really should be expecting when coming down the 26 corridor. You did mention that it was a gateway project, and I'm excited to see the juxtaposition of a mural that could be somewhat contemporary with the more traditional architecture going down King Street with post-inquiry buildings. So thank you for acknowledging and providing all the information.
Further board comments? Thanks, Mr. Brown.
So also in again, I'm not going to repeat anyone's comments anymore, but I'm in support of this project from the get-go, and all the simplifications and all that, it's meeting the previous comments, so it's great. I'm also always for the public art, which is murals, and would be really looking forward to see actual design. The one thing about the two-color brick, maybe we should see it on a mock-up panel before we make any decisions on that. And as far as I'm not sure if there's two alternatives. Staff put it up, just preliminary approval, but also as far as the color is concerned, to entrust that to staff. And I think I will support that.
Very good. Further board comments or motion?
I could see this just being handled by staff and final, taking into account all the conversation about brick color, and especially the green, and of course we will see that green in the mock-up, and then the mural thing coming back. That's just a separate application. So with that said, I'll introduce a motion for preliminary approval, board and staff comments, final review by staff for permit drawings, and then also adding that the murals be handled as a separate application.
Mr. White, your motion, as I understand it, is for preliminary approval incorporating board and staff comments, final approval by staff for permit drawings. Murals shall be submitted as a separate application package to the board. Next statement, Ms. Subchuck, was quick to second.
To discuss on that, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
So when does that application come forward?
Time-wise?
I mean,
You
I would
make just so we
expect
don't end
it-
up with another.
Right.
Yeah.
Committee.
So would we could say it needs to come forth before the before permit drawings are submitted? I mean, I'm not sure what level of engagement you've got with the local artists or any.
Yeah, the applicant may need to inform that. So what we're trying to do is to sympathetic to Ms. Johnson's consideration is to make sure, see how far down the line you are on this color and or mural package so that we can get this back quickly and in one piece.
So I'm not sure how Tori could or staff could approve a color without having some idea of what it's going to look like.
Right.
Could be requested by the time of mock-up review.
So I think we could give some guidance. I mean, we could look at color chips and samples and with your brick and get to some place that I think we're comfortable. And then that's what you would put in the mock-up. And then as far as the mural, it could happen before the mock-up or we're on the same time at the same meeting, but I
Well,
don't know
I
if
think-
it's enough room for.
I think since the application included placeholders for murals that are to be designed, that means we expect that there are murals in it of some sort. And then if they disappear, well, now you're not building what was approved. The issue with the tech center wasn't that they just said, well, forget it, we're not going to do this. They actually told us, like, well, we can't really do that. Can we just do a form letter? And we said yes. And it was a terrible, terrible mistake. Which I don't think will repeat. So it can take a long time if you're doing public art at this scale. It can take a while to get it squared away.
Yeah, Mr. Fessler, I was going to say, if you want to comment on,
If the board would be okay with this, I would recommend that we get submit for permit and submit the design for the mural after that.
After that, could be at the end of the job.
Just before construction begins. How about that?
staff,
It's hard to control that once a permit's issued.
Yeah, you cannot stop for much.
Yeah, we can't issue you a permit as a city and then say you can't start work.
right?
Unless you're looking for a change order on day one. I think it depends on how long it takes y'all to start to firm up what this mural may be. But I really think that proper procedure would require that it be handled before the project receives final from staff.
I would agree. That's staff consideration. It just gets bumped back until we've got that mural issue resolved. And I think that's what we're saying. Okay. All right. So that Mr. White's motion stands after the discussion from Mr. Metters and is now in proper order to call the roll. Mr. Brown, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yeah.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yeah,
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Agenda item number 3,
Okay.
Hampstead Hill Park. Okay.
All right, agenda item number 3 is Hampstead Mall Southeast Park renovation. This one is on the east side neighborhood in the Old City District, requesting conceptual approval for the renovation of an existing park to include an outdoor classroom with landscaping, hardscape improvements, and the installation of new perimeter fence and pedestrian gates. We have some context slides showing you the location via an aerial. Existing, there is a chain link fence on the property. We'll have the applicant go. Thanks.
Good evening, Board. I'm Jeff Barrowe, the Chief Operating Officer for Charleston County School District. I'd like to open by respectfully requesting an additional 2 minutes so we can show you a video.
Certainly.
I know. With me today is DJ Helms. He's going to be our project manager. He is our project manager on this project with Studio Architects, and he's going to actually present the project. I just wanted to present a quick overview. We do own the property. We have a joint use agreement with the City of Charleston for public use. That was one of the desires that we received during our public meetings. We've had 2 public meetings with the East Side neighborhood, and that would allow public use after school hours. So we would unlock 2 of the gates and allow public to use that. And that would really be beneficial during the holidays of the school breaks. Our school, Early College High School, has an agreement with Trident Tech. We're on that campus across the street. We use this area for PE, and as mentioned, we will use it for an outdoor classroom. We are going to be building a support facility on the old Wilmot Fraser campus. So essentially, the quad will be between those two buildings. With that, I'd ask TJ to come up here to present our project.
So if you're done, we'll take us to the next slide, please.
Perfect. Okay, so this is the existing site plan. What you can see here is that existing perimeter fence is a chain link fence. We are proposing removing that chain link fence. You'll also see these existing concrete slabs that are located throughout the site. We'll propose removing those as well as the bench seating that's there, or picnic table seating you'll see in some images that we have later on at the site. Next slide, please. We wanted to give some context to our site and the surrounding quadrants of the park. So we're going to go through northwest and then all the way across to northeast. So this is northwest. What I'd like to call your attention to here is the wrought iron fencing, as well as the low wall along the perimeter, as well as the signage here in the bottom right-hand photo. Next slide, please. This is the northwest quadrant. What we'd like to call your attention to again is that perimeter fence that's a wrought iron fence, as well as that low wall, as well as the brick edging on the concrete walkways. Next slide, please. Again, here we'd like to call your attention to the brick edging along the walkways, the hardscape and landscape, the trash cans. And this is the southwest quadrant. The next slide, please. It is our site, the south east quadrant. And what you're going to see here again is those picnic tables and bench seating, as well as that perimeter chain link fence. And you're getting a glimpse of some of the concrete pads that are out there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the proposed architectural site plan. The first thing I'd like to call your attention to is that multi-purpose playing field that's located on the south side of the site, as well as the outdoor classroom. The outdoor classroom would consist of some seat walls that would be brick, and we have some examples of those later on in the project. And then, of course, how those sidewalks organically make their way to the corners to provide access and kind of connect this quadrant of the park to the other quadrants, as well as to the schools across the street and to the corner of the street. We also are providing an entry point at the south side of the site, and we'll show you a little bit larger detail later on what those look like. We'd also like to call your attention to the bench seating, the lighting, and trash cans, dog waste stations, and drinking fountains scattered throughout the walkways. Next slide, please. These are some elevations of the site. There are just a little difficult to read on the screen now, but what you can see is kind of the relationship of the entryways to the perimeter fence, as well as the lighting inside and that low seat wall at the classroom, and how that all kind of connects together. So we'll show you that in a little bit more detail and where they are throughout the site on the landscape plan in a couple of slides. So next slide, please. This is an enlarged plan and elevation of one of the entry points. All the entry points pay tribute to what is across the street on the north quadrants of the park. In using those concrete piers that are cast in place, which are have a facade on them that match the ones on the north quadrant of stucco and painted to match, and we'll show you that material in another slide going forward. We are proposing using wrought iron fencing in between the piers, and outside the piers doing a pre-manufactured fence. And all of these, again, kind of pay or relate to what is already there on the other quadrants, as well as that signage piece that we have kind of placard on the entry point of this cave. Okay, next slide. And again, same thing here. This is the first one was the northwest side. This is the northeast side. And so it is basically a mirror image of what you just saw. And then the next one will be slightly different. So if we could go next slide, please. This is that south entry gate that is slightly different, but still very similar to the other corners. And then next slide. This is an access gate. It's primarily going to be, or proposing using it for the early college across the street. And then as well as landscaping as far as utilizing the larger gate that's on the right-hand side here for equipment to maintain the lawns. Okay, next slide, please. This is just a little bit more detail of those piers, both in plan and in section, how those would be constructed and how they would be finished. Again, the finish on those, we'll show you in the next slide, would be to match what is across the street with a stucco finish and color to match. So we can go to the next. So this is a detail of the seat wall at the outdoor classroom. We're proposing a brick finish on that with a concrete top. We'll leave some open spots in that seat wall for drainage. Next slide, please. These are the finishes. Again, that wrought iron black fencing. On the inside of the piers, the outside of the piers would be the pre-manufactured fencing, and then that stucco and the color of the stucco. The next slide. This is the landscape plan. It just shows you a lot more of where that play field, that multi-purpose play field is underneath the foliage that exists today, right? Those tree canopies and how all of the things that we've explained on previous slides would work with what is there existing today. Next slide, please. And then these are some of the interior components of the park, which again, that brick edging, the signage, the trash cans, water fountain, dog station, lighting, light posts, things of that nature. Next one. And these three slides, this one and the two after, are some stills of the entry points that we just kind of referenced. The stucco piers with that cast iron and perimeter fencing. Next one. That's the last one. So if we have that video, it would be perfect.
Don't have one.
Okay, we sent over a link with it.
You've done a great job with the presentation. If we don't have it, I don't think it's hurting.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Public comment that's been submitted in advance has been considered and it's written in reduced form. Any members of the public care to speak on this agenda item? Hearing none, city staff comments or recommendations.
Okay, we have a few comments here. Number one, staff understands the need to secure this area to be used by the adjacent school for a certain period of time during the day, and that agreements are in place to regulate when the park is open to the public. Two, the zoning division has no issues with the heights and location of the fencing and piers. Three, while curbing consistently around the project would be consistent with the northern quadrants, the fencing is an upgrade from the chain link fencing that exists there now. The pre-manufactured fencing, piers, and curb wall should match the existing at the northern quadrants of the mall as closely as possible. 4, omit the knee wall adjacent to the gate between the two entry piers in order to maintain the symmetry that was created with the piers and fencing at these locations. That's on page 9, 10, and 11 that we need to go back. And then 5, the stucco texture of the piers and curb wall shall match the stucco texture of the similar elements of the northern quadrants. The proposed appears too rough in the photographs. It is assumed that the color of the newly proposed elements matches the color on similar elements in the northern quadrant. The applicant did speak to that. We're recommending final approval with board and staff comments with a final review by staff of the 4 permit drawings.
The applicants afforded a response if they want to use it.
Yeah, we'll just reiterate exactly what we said about the finishes, and we'll take into consideration the flow wall.
Very good. Thank you. Board discussion and a vote on this agenda item.
I have one question.
Sure.
You used the term wrought iron several times. So that's really what you're using.
That's what we're proposing using between the piers. Now, outside the piers is a pre-manufactured metal fence or aluminum fence.
So it's an aluminum fence.
On the outside of the piers, for example, in this photo, anything on the inner of the piers as well as the gates would be a wrought iron, and then anything on the outside would be that pre-manufactured.
That's what I thought I saw. So I just didn't hear that. Maybe I missed it. But I think that's an important detail. And, the reason for it all not being wrought iron is.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's just cost. It also will reflect what is on other CCSD campuses. So we're trying to stay true to that, as well as what has been somewhat proposed across the street at the early college.
This project being a public partnership is a little unique in that regard. Further questions or discussion?
My only question is, it is a partnership. I understand that. I am a little concerned that it is fully fenced in. It's not entirely engaging with the neighborhood, and that if it is a public park to be used outside of class time, then the public may not necessarily feel comfortable in going in. But that doesn't really relate to the architecture or anything. What I've also noticed is that there's only 3 entry points. Is that right?
There's 4 if you count the access point, which actually is all of the access points have, or all of the entry access points have emergency egress and stuff on that to meet code.
I just have I know that that the school district or the city or someone's going to want to use this park, and they're going to want to bring in food trucks or something like that. So I think I'm thinking about the accessibility of the park generally for something for a larger event or what have you.
I would just offer that the maintenance gate would allow larger equipment to get into that park, so we could get things in there. The second thing is that we did in our public meetings explain exactly the way it was going to look, and there wasn't any pushback from anybody on that accessibility to get in and out of there. It was a very positive meeting we had in July actually, in which they were excited about the use of the park after hours. So we didn't get any of that negative feedback.
Well, and overall, I think this is like a great project, and excited to see some improvements to that area.
It benefits the neighborhood, even though some of the commentary is a little outside of our purview. The important thing is it's an aesthetic improvement to the neighborhood. Who has access to the park and when is not our decision, but it will be a very nice park for the residents of the neighborhood to attend, as well as these children. Further board
Right, and
comments?
it's a kind of step forward was keeping developing of the public spaces, but actually very functional ones. The only concern I will have is we are saying that prefab metal, I guess aluminum fencing will need to match the wrought iron, which will be very difficult to do because of the detailing, attachments and things like that. So I think I will be very cautious about that. And do we require the markup on this one? I don't know, because of this particular issue.
That's up to you all, but do you think a sample of your manufactured and your imagery and your design for your art piece would be important?
Yep, and I would agree we don't need that at a conceptual, and say respectfully to the applicant and architect, be forewarned on this compatibility of materials issues. Don't let that get you caught short going down the road.
This is the suggestion from staff is that final review by staff for permit drawings. And so I'd be fine not having a mock-up review and putting that money towards going to raw iron and the fence.
It's not going to.
So I know it's not, I understand that, but if you're ready for a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Then I'll make it. I make a motion for final approval with board and staff comments with final review by staff. And I'm including in this that the staff is charged with making sure that they very much understand the difference in cost between wrought iron and aluminum, and factor that decision into your decision to approve it or not. And I'm also outside of that motion challenging the school board that this isn't something that's going to be there for 5 years, it's going to be there for 100 years. And that likelihood of that aluminum fencing portion not being there for that long is high. So I hope we can all come together. I know there's a huge difference, but it'll be staff's decision.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Metters. I think that's it. That is a helpful answer. Your motion, as I understand it, is for conceptual approval, incorporating board and staff comments with final approval to be made by staff, including on the issue of material.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, Mr. Brown seconds. Mr. Sobchak, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Yay in favor? Mr. Metters?
Yay.
Mr. Brown? And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 4, 860 Morrison Drive. Nope. School staff. That was. Sorry, that's strange.
All right, item number 4 is 860 Morrison Drive, requesting final approval for the total demolition of 2 structures. One was constructed in 1950, the other in 1995. Obviously, the 1951 is in our purview. Neither building is rated, and they are in the historic corridor district. This is the location with the building up on Morrison being the one from 1950. The one that was constructed in 1995 is attached, but it's not in purview of this board. We'll get a closer aerial. Reviews from the street. Contact photos.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I visited this site yesterday with others, and there's no one here in opposition to this tonight. And if you and my fellow board members have no objection and there's no public comment, I would like to make a motion for approval if you would have.
I'm glad to entertain it. Let's have a major motion. In all fairness, is there any discussion on that? I don't know that there is.
And there may be somebody in opposition, but there wasn't yesterday.
Is there anyone in the public or any interested party who is in opposition to the requested demolition? Hear none. Any board discussion?
I'll second the motion.
There's been a motion and a second. We're moving this right along. The motion is for final approval of demolition. Mr. Brown, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters? Ms. Sobchak?
Yay.
Mr. White? And myself, yay in favor. May set a time record on that.
Best one you've ever done.
All right, item number 5 is 237 Main Street. This one is also not rated. It's in the older historic district. It was constructed in 1964. Obviously, there's been some alterations since then. This one's requesting conceptual approval for alterations of building elements beyond the existing court of the sheriff for a new lobby entrance. This is the location of the building. This one. We can share in question. What else? All right, Mr. Batchelder.
Ms. Clark Batchelder with Guthrie and Tony Associates. This is for the Ryder Hotel. We recently did renovations on this last year. There's some portion with the new ownership. There's a portion of the garage level that we'd like to upgrade with a new canopy and a new storefront to enclose the cantilevered portion of the garage. So if you could go through the next couple pages here. Yes, the existing photos page, go on previous ones, please. This just shows you the color palette, the stained wood roof, the light fixtures, the existing overhang down the garage. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is an existing plan showing you where the existing vestibule is down in the lobby. It's hardly accessible. So we're actually making upgrades to make this a fully accessible. We met with Jan Schumacher on this. She's excited about the project as well. And next slide, please. This is the new proposed plan. Put in a stair to access that lower level lobby, adjust the ramp and extend the pavers down, which will give a nicer feel, more inviting arrival. Next slide, please. To give you an idea of what, based on the existing condition, what we're actually doing. And it really is tucked back beyond the portico share, but you still will see it from the entrance drive. Next slide, please. This is an enlarged plan, being more in-depth idea of we're trying not to modify the actual pavers in the portico share itself, but as you go down the ramp, that's where we would start our modifications. Next slide, please. This is the elevation sections of the new canopy that we're proposing, and really it's ideally it's going to match the existing canopy on Meeting Street. We want it to be the same feel, same color, same tie-back rods, just good protection as you walk down to that lower level lobby. And then introduce new pilasters to match the existing design with the same color palette. Next slide, please. This is a before and after shot. Really gives you an idea of the blankness and the emptiness that the garage has. So what we're doing is providing lush greenery, a new decorative canopy, and feels as much better feel to this arrival point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batchelder. Public comment on this agenda item. Take your city staff comments and recommendations.
Number one, the project was initially approved with a provision for the green walls without the wire lattice. A sidewalk encouragement easement will be required for these, and they should be irrigated to be successful. Two, applicant is confident that queuing of vehicles caused by valet parking can be worked out with the city's traffic and transportation department, a critical next step. Zoning division has no issue with what is proposed, and there is no TRC review required due to the small size of the addition. We understand this has been resolved. And three, the new lobby situated behind the portico share and significantly lower than the current entry will have a minimal impact on the street presence of the project. Therefore, the recommendation is final approval with board and staff comments, with final review by staff of the forthcoming drawings.
Any response, Mr. Batchelder? Board comments and a vote on this agenda.
I agree with staff's recommendation.
Have a motion?
I'll introduce a motion for final approval with board and staff comments and a final review by staff for permanent drawings.
Thank you. That's straight off the slide, so I'm not going to restate. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. I'll go down the roll. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
In favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yay.
Ms. Sobel? Mr. White?
Yay, in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Agenda item number 6, G Street Pump Station.
Okay, 900 King Street is the Hughley Street Pump Station. This is new construction in the North Central neighborhood, Lake District 2.5 Historic Corridor District. Tonight we are requesting final approval of a new stormwater pump station and community area. I'm the subject presenter.
Initial took SGN override, consultants, owners, basically. We have already presented this back in March, I believe, and since then there were a lot of development of engineering, progressing of design, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think everybody in this on the board were present at that conceptual review, so I don't want to concentrate on every single drawing here, but go through some of the comments we had and how we approach resolutions of those and things like that. So, pretty much first 15 pages show practicalization, context, some of our maps, history of the area, engineering concept for the what they call the brain bomb solution. For the area. So we can go through those very quickly. The next one, I'd like to look at page 15. Number 15. So with that one, what we, on the left-hand side, you see the typing, we just looked at the comments from staff and board, and we have the responses to it and put it in responses. But those, some of the comments were more of the observation, so they would not even require responses. And most of them will be, if you look at the more of the drawings and images, you will see what we have done to reflect this solutions to the comments. So if we look at the, drawings from 16 to 27, the line drawings of floor plans, elevations, 3D images on basically showing what is we had presented previously and what we're presenting today with the development of this project. So again, if you let's go to page 16. That's a plan, and I will walk you through what have actually changed there. With the developing of engineering, what we call this vertical structure house, actually housing the large electrical parts, which grew in size, also needed some other components like HVAC, condenser, and things like that. So our enclosure have been elongated a little bit, and on the this is huge street side, so it's basically got a little bit larger on this side, and it's hiding the condensers behind it. Also, there we have not had any information about transformer and its size at that time, a few months ago. So now we know the size, we know where we can have located, and so this new plan shows enclosure of the transformer, which is really high, taking into account that it has to be elevated by so on as well. So you will see on the elevations this enclosure is actually a continuation and extension of the enclosure of the platform which we proposed earlier. So again, page 18. So you can see that's a huge street elevation. We previous the image, rendered image, and the line drawing elevation, and the current image and line drawing elevation. There was one of the comment was to see if we can engage more of the break veneers in this enclosure. So that's what is done now. You can see the base for the tiles is actually raised, and the tall brick, and it has a three sides to it. And what we are looking at The brick will match the color of the bricks, what is in the existing historic buildings, but also a little bit of the details of projections and step brick and things like that. So same page 20, it's on the other side. It's the same issue. Here we it's but it's not as projected as much, but we're still engaging the more brick at the base. Page 21. Here we were talking about what was the grade at the and the pond walls and what the color and how it will be stained or not. And right now, what we're showing is on the renderings, it's still a gray concrete color, but what is proposed is to use the epoxy paint, the black epoxy paint, and this all the walls of the pond will be painted that way. And now we go through trying to speed up this a little bit. Again, 16 through 27 sheets, we can go pretty quickly. Again, we're showing on the left-hand side what we presented earlier, on the right-hand side what we developed about the mall. You also can see, if we can keep going to, say, 28. Let's see, 28. So that's basically a few views of what we're proposing now, the newest views. And 27. Again, those are two comparison images of aerial images of the overall project, and you can see that again the pond increase. You can see how the landscaping has been developed, and if you point page 29, it's really showing how much pictorial, picturesque this community area became. A lot of really social landscaping, acceptable forms, accessible areas for the people to gather there, and all the landscaping specifically been worked through with the owners and DRC involvement. So all the species of the planting and trees actually shown here accurately what the colors will be and things like that. So all other renderings actually present this. And the rest of the pages is pretty much to support where we're coming from for the materials which we've chosen. They just contain steel mainly for the enclosure, concrete, but also since we are actually applied for the final review here, we wanted to show this. We wanted to include some of the engineering drawings. They're very extensive. There's a lot of drawings, so we just picked a few of them for you to see how this project is developing, but not actually trying to review all of them. So at this point, I think that's going to be what I want to say about this project, unless and so we will be open to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Subject.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a couple
Sir.
questions? So you mentioned whether that I may have misunderstood, but the brick color, the new construction would be close to matching the brick color on the windows and the buildings there. I'm not sure I don't know that that's necessary. In my, the way I look at it, it to be distinctively different, maybe, okay, but I mean, I appreciate that. Second is this building and the function of it, but basically the same as the building that's down on Concord Street and the building that's in between the two bridges, the Ashley River bridges, in terms of its form and function, it's basically the same thing.
Regarding design, it does serve a general purpose. The difference on this one is that in addition to the building acting as like the pumping house, we're also having incorporating community aspect of it. So, but if you're looking at just the structure itself and the functionality of it, is very similar to the Concord Street Fishburne.
I went to look at both of those, and I think they're good. You see that it's a new structure. And, so with that in mind, there's a lot of concrete that I think from looking at the plan that you'll be able to see. Is it possible to put color in that concrete? You know, so it's not just distinctively white next to it. And I actually don't, I know that I do that on a small scale. I don't know about a big scale, but I think that could be a positive impact, not to see the enormity of the white there.
So
But
the pond walls, we're already thinking it will be because it also prevents from stains and things like that. Around the actual platform, there will be some visibility of this concrete, not a lot, and we can look at paint, we can look at the texture, and we have a lot of vegetation there as well on the perimeter.
then the last question was just that there's a fountain that you see. Is that just for aesthetics and peacefulness, or is that for some type of treatment?
That's mostly for aeration. Of that particular one, it provides multiple ones. Breaks water, surface water for mosquitoes that don't allow and also the oxidation of that, so you don't get
Not any, no treatment.
there's no chemical treatments or anything like that. Thanks.
Very good. We jumped off track. City staff comments or recommendations. I'm sorry, is there any public comment on this item? Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is James Ward, and I just had a sort of comment based on my role as a teacher at College of Charleston. Given the emphasis put on the aesthetics of this building, I really am blown away by it. I'm really happy about that. But it just seems to me that we have an opportunity for public engagement and perhaps generating and keeping public support for this kind of massive project. If we incorporated more sort of public interpretive signage as part of the presentation, I mentioned that not as a criticism, obviously, but just as a thought, which I haven't seen played out. I've noticed in other cities where they've had this kind of low impact development even, or even something as engineered as this, but they reached out and tried to tell the public exactly what was happening instead of just making it pretty. And I think that helps to engage the public, make them aware of where the money's going, and also perhaps keep them committed to the process over a longer period of time. So I just didn't know the right way to put that, but I'm hoping that is helpful.
That is, thank you, Dr. Mr. Ward. I appreciate your comments, very thoughtful. Other public comment on this agenda item? City staff comments or recommendations?
Number one, this interesting project marries the functions of a much-needed stormwater pump station with a public park. As a reminder from the conceptual review, the project will use different materials in a contemporary party, while the color palette, scale, and massing of the primary structure will be compatible and sympathetic to the nearby historic Ensign homes. Much of the housing for the sizable equipment will be below grade, resulting in a building height that is approximately the same as that of the Ensign homes. The project has continued to be refined, with revisions including an opening up of the plaza space on Hugie Street, which will provide more space to access and use the park. The park area has gone through several iterations, resulting in a comfortable public space around a pond, which staff is assured will retain roughly the same level of water year-round. It is noted that the interior lining of the pond will be painted with black epoxy paint, although this is not reflected on the segments in the middle of the pond. Very well, staff is appreciative of applicant's decision to replace the brick texture for 10 panels with real brick and to replace the board form concrete with a smooth concrete. We do believe that the exterior concrete should be textured or finished in some manner. And 4, noise mitigation has not been addressed outside of confirming the location of the pumps to be underground. The perceived need for or lack of need for sound mitigation should be confirmed. And lighted bollards, which normally are not acceptable, are likely appropriate here due to the public and institutional nature of the project. And last, number 6, applicant to provide photometric information for each type of fixture, as well as site photometric data. We are recommending final approval with board and staff comments with a final review by staff of 4 permit drawings.
Any rebuttal or reply from the applicant?
Yes, not rebuttal, but clarification. Regarding the noise mitigation, as part of the beginning project, we conducted a HUD noise assessment as part of this, and as part of that assessment, the effects of the pumps were negligible, particularly to the residential and to the right-of-way areas. We do have a report of the applicant to supply that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
I'll just add,
Yes.
this, the bollards, I've realized that in the package, they were really hard to see. Y'all can share these. So this is a blow up of the non-lit and the lit bollard. The lit bollard, very little glare from that. It really just is directed down at the pavement to help direct you. We actually have these at our office on our meeting if you want to see them in person.
Very good. Thank you for that. That is a very helpful clarification as to the bollard. Certainly. Board discussion and a vote on this item.
I will motion to vote for final approval with board and staff comments and final review by staff for 4 permit drawings.
Okay, so as the staff had stated, Mr. Brown, your motion is final approval with board and staff comments, final review by staff for permit drawing.
That's correct.
All right, Mr. Metters, can I get a second from you?
Yeah. The questions that I asked, is that also board comments?
Yes, sir.
That could be,
Absolutely.
a second.
And I think Ms. Sochuk would take those into consideration. I have a motion and a second. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yea in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yea in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Agenda item number 7, 584 meeting.
We're switching it over.
Sure. It's okay.
Let's go.
Item number 7. Number 7. It's 584 Main Street. This is a new construction project in the East Central Neighborhood, High District 5, Historic Corridor District. The applicant is requesting final approval for new construction of a mixed-use apartment building. Got contact slides to familiarize you. So this is the portion, this is the block just north of the Regis Milk site. This is the property today. And this is the property on your left. And on your right. The applicant start.
Jeff Roberts for the development team. Thank you, Tori, Lawrence, and the board. It's a privilege to present for our final approval. I'd also like to thank the preservation community for participating in the formation of this project, which I think has made it a great project. As lead architect Bill Hornoff from 2RZ will elaborate a little further. We took our time from preliminary to come back to final, because there were some details that Bill will further enumerate that we wanted to get just right, because it's a complex building, but we have experience of doing this type of project, and it's a developer and architecture intensive supervision. And while it's a complex building, we know how to do it and have the right people to carry it off. So again, it's a privilege to present for final approval. And for that, let me introduce the lead architect of the project, Bill Morrison.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I have a set of drawings here that's way too long and probably too boring. So if I give you the page number, can you go to that? Okay. So why don't we, what I'd like to do, this is my first time presenting for final, so if I skip over anything, please just, I'm happy to answer any questions. But what I'd like to do is focus on the three principal materials really that make up the building. So if you wouldn't mind going to page 28, what I'd like to do is focus on these wall sections that we have, which I think outline how the building comes together.
I don't have page numbers.
No, if you can just go to the 28th page, if that helps.
Well, we have a bunch of drawings assembled together from different projects. So if you have the actual, the actual A2 dot, you know,
Oh, really?
if you have that, it would be probably more helpful. Yeah.
Sorry.
28.
It's all right.
So if we could start at A5.00. I told you these were boring. Yeah, right there's great. So as we're getting there, the three principal materials really are the base, which is made up of brick. Brick is pretty straightforward. I think the most interesting thing about the brick is the rustication. We're alternating every fourth course. We're going to pull the brick out 3/4 of an inch. The brick scale is a Norman sized brick, velour cut. So I think the Norman scale is a little bit more in keeping with the size of the building itself, but it'll give it a little bit more weight. It's Acme brick. The color is slate gray, so it's a little brown grayish brick, not unlike what the renderings show. And then again, I'm sure you recall the middle portion of this is clad in a metal standing seam panel. I think what some of the comments from prelim were the concern for us to watch for the quality level of the metal itself. We've had a number of discussions with the manufacturer. We're doing a standing seam panel. It's a 0.032 mil thickness, 16th inch wide batten. We've had some discussions with them about preventing oil tanning. One of the preventative measures is using a shim at each fastener that helps make sure that the panel is evenly secured to the building. That'll help minimize the oil tanning. The other is that these panels are really just going to span from, while they can go 22 feet, we're only really spanning them from floor to ceiling. So that's a 9-foot 8-inch height. But more importantly, all of the trim pieces are going to be manufacturer produced. So it's all preformed metal by that same manufacturer. So that means certainly the copings, the building has metal copings pretty much throughout, but the J trim, the base trims, the sill flashings are all going to be by the manufacturer. And it all matches in the same color. But the most important material is this porcelain. And I can tell you it's a lot easier just to say, let's put porcelain on the building, and then you actually have to figure out how to do it. It's a little tricky. Our main goal here was that the porcelain panels be a large format. We did a lot of studies of smaller format panels. And while we really wanted a large formatted panel because of the size of the building, having the fasteners hidden was also very important. And what we found is that the bigger the panel got, the more the manufacturer wanted us to expose fasteners. So we have a product now. It's by Cosentino, a very large company. The material's out of Spain, but it's backed onto an FPA 285 rated panel. It's basically a insulated panel, and it's attached. It's fused directly to the panel, and then the profile itself is a lot like a tongue groove. So that what you're really doing is just taking a stainless steel screw through the tongue and screwing it into the substrate. So, our thinking here is that it's a pretty easy installation, which means that the success rate is just that much higher. The joints will be open, but they're thick. They're 1/16 of an inch wide. So our panel size itself, I think we have a board here, is a light beige, and the backing is white. So, I think the joint itself is going to be fairly hidden. But the panel, so we're able to maintain a 22-inch wide by 120-inch panel, which is still decent. It's about as big as we need to get it. The details for the panel are such that these volumes that we have are wrapped both, of course, on the face and back to the sides, but also underneath. And so we've talked to the manufacturer about doing the joints, how we'll take the porcelain panels and bring the joints, together so it looks like a solid volume. And then they're capped with a prefabricated metal coping. For the porcelain panel, it will be a metal that matches the color of the porcelain. Obviously, we're also doing a metal coping at the standing seam, and that will have a color that matches the standing seam as well. So I kept talking, we didn't look at different slides, but they kind of look just like that, really. If you don't mind just going to the next ones. Right here you kind of see the corner of the building at Nassau and Stewart. This is the entrance at the amenity space. But here you can kind of see the transition from brick to metal to the porcelain panel. And I think it might be hard to see on the screen there, but you can also see the panel side itself. Next slide. The entry to the garage. This is the huge, we'll call it the Hugie side of the building. Very similar in nature, but these are all where they're enclosed on Stewart, they're open on Hugie. Same clad in the same material though. So, like I said, if I've gone, I'm happy to answer any questions, or if I missed anything, I'm happy to go back if you need.
For a first time at final, you handled it the right way. You zoned in on the concerns and comments that have been brought to you before. I know Mr. Metters in particular will be mollified by all your attention to these material details. He's very often interested in those.
I was up all night worrying about this.
Well, that's good. That's the right answer. Let's see. Is there any public comment on this agenda item from anyone on the floor? Hearing none, city staff comments.
Number one, design has continued down a very similar path as before, but comparison drawings as noted in the submittal requirements would be beneficial and necessary for any additional reviews. Two, the clear distinction between a strong base, a somewhat truncated middle of a different material and color, and a strong top are an interesting abstraction of the traditional layering on this decidedly contemporary building. Three, the materials and detailing are consistent with what the board has been led to expect with a relatively simple palette, with enough variation in the materials, colors, and textures to make it visually interesting. Four, is a consistent staff concern, metal flashing should be minimized, have thin edges, and have ends placed vertically on the surface behind them and held as tightly as possible, also creating a drip edge. And five, board should really weigh in on any super unique conditions which they need to see in the mock-up panel. And we're recommending final approval with board and staff revisions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any response from the applicant? Okay. Board discussion and a vote on this item.
I appreciate the attention to detail. It's funny, it's actually kind of an old school final submittal where it's all black and white. It's just technical, and that's fine. That's actually exactly what we're looking for. And I appreciate the way the material investigations have wrapped themselves.
I do too. I'm sorry.
I said black and white because we didn't have any architectural issues previously as well.
That's right. And obviously, the onus is on the applicant to make these materials work. The fact that they are manufactured, as Mr. White frequently comments, this day and age is probably a good thing, so you don't have to worry about on-site quality control conditions. Just everyone else, we forewarned about it. Make it work and let staff know early if there are problems.
And all done in Spain, right?
Right, all manufactured in Spain. Further board comments?
So, I've been a fan of this project from the beginning, right? But in Tori's first comment, where she asked about comparison drawings, I know a lot of times it's put in there, but for me, I might not be able to see it as clearly as Jay or Luda. So comparison drawings are very important to me in the future. Those are critical for me to see what the changes are. And at the end of it is where I'd expect to see them. And I did, during the course of reviewing the plans, I saw them. But otherwise, I continue to be. Thank you.
Further board comments or motion?
Well, I got one other thing.
Yes, sir.
Tori's last comment was what we wanted to see in the mock-up.
Yeah,
You detailed, pick up on the main details that he commented about, which were the most difficult details and other details.
I think the applicant has self-represented the challenge they have on getting this right, and that they are confident they're going to get it right. That's what we rely on that. Motion.
I'll introduce one for final approval with board and staff comments.
Motion is for final approval with board and staff comments. Is there a second? Ms. Sobchak, second. Mr. Brown, how do you vote on this agenda item?
I abstain.
Mr. Bennett.
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchak.
Yay in favor.
Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Moving at a pretty steady clip this evening. And that may slow down on this next one. We'll see. Agenda item number 860 Morrison Drive. Morrison Yard Phase 3.
This will be Morrison Yard Phase 3. There are two projects that we'll be reviewing as part of this phase. And we will get an intro on this first one. The first one is the hotel. It's a new construction project, High Districts 4 and 12. This is the UP zoning. And get the intro on the site as well. Stewart Corridor District, and they are requesting conceptual approval for new construction of a hotel building at Morrison Yard. Right. Let's start with some context slides. This is the building that you voted tonight to demolish. This is the building to the south. And there we go.
Very good. The applicant has the floor.
Good evening. My name is Zach Bearden with Origin Development Partners. I'm the landowner and the master developer for Morrison Yard. And this is phase 3 of our development project. We actually acquired the site in December of last year, but we actually started design in November of last year and kicked that off with a design charrette. And you'll hear from our entire team this evening. We have our development team here as well as our architectural team. And the one thing I just wanted to stand up and say is that I'm proud to be a part of this group because we've really worked hard with all of the major stakeholders that are involved, including our staff. But for this design, and I hope that everyone here will see this, that we've really prioritized design over pro forma. So I just kind of wanted to note that. Turn things over to Eddie Bella.
Mr. Bella.
Exactly. I'm Eddie Bella with Bella Garris Architects, and so this is a little unusual in that we have two different properties, two different projects, the hotel and then the next agenda item, family, that they're on one site. So I wanted to just introduce to you how we thought about the site. It was actually right. We spent a lot of time as a project team thinking about how the overall site development is organized. So Lawrence, if you could go to the next slide. I'll try to go quick, but good news is some of what I'm saying, and Chuck won't have to say it. We'll skip over this because Sanborn Maps was in historic fabric up here. Just thinking about the site again, you know where it is. A couple of things that stand out
the elevated highway to Mount Pleasant, 17 Mount Bridge is there. Just to the north of our site is the Charleston water system property. That has a main on it, meaning that nothing can ever be built there. We're going to use it for parking, and we'll come back later to show how that'll be mitigated screen. But the key takeaway is that that'll always be open. And then the two sites, the hotel site here, which my partner will talk about the hotel in a minute, and then the big wraparound site for the multifamily. Next one, please. This is just another view. Again, I think everybody's pretty aware. One of the that we did consider, next slide, Lawrence, is the view of this project, the perception of it as one is on the highway. Thought about that a lot. We did not want, it's a big project, we did not want one big mass and one that multiple together. We were very deliberate about breaking this up into several volumes because we were very conscious of the streetscape and the skyline building. So this is the last thing you're going to see as we head over to Mount Pleasant. And as you come into Charleston, it's one of the first things you'll see. You'll be looking at over 6 lanes, but you'll still see it. And we consider that a good thing. Next slide. And of course, the main thing is to us is what you see and what you experience from the street. There's not a lot of context up there. There's not any historic fabric. There's not much street grid. Now it's slowly being built with its first 2 phases. So a lot of what we focused on really was driven by what has been most recently been built. And again, the earlier phase is a very large, dynamic office building. This just to the south. Next slide. And then there's a very dense multifamily project. So those are all coming along nicely. They're almost finished. As the sort of last component of this, we wanted to kind of step down the intensity of it and not have it feel too much. And so one of the key things about that was keeping again the buildings broken up. Next slide. Again, across the street, low scale, non-historic. Industrial building soon to be gone. Next slide. Okay, so this streetscape here shows the east side of Morrison. Again, the earlier phases, and then you can see just sort of how we broke up this project into 2 separate volumes on the street, and then even more. We'll talk about this on the multifamily. So next slide. So if you think about how this project could be approached, and you guys see this a lot on these very dense projects, the zoning allows high density, you've got to have a lot of parking. So there's a lot of problems with that. You see some of these are lots of examples around the city. We'll have parking in the middle and the architecture around it, but you'll have this one long continuous building. It's very hard to mitigate in terms of proportion and lifting up the mass, all the things that the board asked for. So we didn't do any of that. We broke it up right away. So we've got 2 different programs with all their own programmatic requirements, garage noise, and we now have an air dry instead of having one large building. Because we have 2 separate buildings, and really, when you get to multifamily, that's actually broken down into more. Next slide. So you can see here. So again, just to orient you, Morrison, phase 1 and 2, and then our project. So we've got the hotel, which again, Eric Harris is going to go through in a minute. A large opening in between that's a shared auto plaza, and then the multifamily, which again is broken up quite a bit. Next slide. So again, just to orient you, the hotel, the bridge up here. So what's fairly unique is we still have to have all the parking. But the parking is underneath what we have here, so raised here. So we've got this very wide open space, and landscape architects will explain, but it's almost like a people plaza more than cars. It's got really nice pavers and trees and benches and all those things. But it's a shared space for both buildings. And then about 150 feet back is, instead of a big sheer wall, we have a stepped terrace that's planted and it's basically an open part, which you can see as a visual sort of terminus. And then above that is this raised open plaza, and again, all the way through. Still Chuck's thunder, but the idea is this building is broken out as you look through it. So the thing I want to stress is we went to great lengths to not have a big mass facing the street. We've got smaller, again, you look and see we turn the massing so that the majority of the weight of these buildings is back on the site. The narrow portions are on the street, which is much more interesting. Two more slides. Next slide. This just shows how the traffic works. Again, instead of having two separate drives, two garage doors, all of that, we pulled in. For the hotel, you come in and drop your car here, and then for the off the street, you don't see it. Kind of the right way to do it. And last thing, this view. Next slide. So this is a view, a site section through courtyard, looking at the hotel. I'm just going to walk through that in a minute. It just shows, about 150 feet back on the drive, and then you start having this. So I think the big thing that we wanted to express was there's a lot of thought in how these buildings would be organized. They didn't deal with heavy on the street.
I'm Eric Garris with Bella Garris Architects. I'm not sure if I need to ask for a time extension or not.
At this point, you do. What do you need? 5 minutes? 10?
5 minutes.
Okay.
I think, Mr. Chairman, they should have coordinated that better.
I didn't have a timer. Is there a clicker or are you do the clicker? Okay. So I'll dovetail to what Eddie said, but thank you. I'm excited about this project. I'm excited, as Zach said in the beginning, to be part of the team. I grew up not far from here, spent my childhood coming to Charleston, live in Mount Pleasant, drive by this site every day. And I've seen the buildings on the other sides of Mount Pleasant that have been developed, and I've seen one other one that's been developed. It's the other gateway entry building in Charleston, and I feel like we can do better. Charleston's got a very rich architectural history. It's rooted in every era of its existence. Something was built that we cherish and hold a high regard today, but it was considered something of a more progressive nature when it was built and designed. And I think that we need to continue that. Early on in this process, Eddie, Artemi, the rest of the office, we really sat down and started to think of what this hotel could be, and came up with something that was pretty compelling, but it was not in Charleston. And it would have been something I think was more jarring than what we're presenting tonight. And so we really kind of backtracked and took another fresh approach at the project and said, this building needs to be up to date. It needs to represent the 21st century. It needs to kind of continue the legacy of great architectural design and focus and detail that Charleston has to offer, but it needs to be quiet. It needs to be unassuming. And it needs to be something you just drive by in the evenings and you're like, man, that's a nice building. And then eventually you drive by and you don't notice it. I'm okay with the backdrop building, even though it's kind of a gateway site. We joke in the office because every project's a gateway project. This truly is a gateway project. So as Eddie mentioned, we've entered as a development team into a 30-year lease agreement with the Charleston Water System to use the property just to the north of the project to serve the majority or all of the hotel parking and some of the multifamily functions for parking and service and access. That is going to be considered by the 30-year lease agreement in conversation with other agency and the city of Charleston, considered perpetually open. So it's going to be something that serves our parking so that we don't park inside of the building. As you can see in this slide, sheet east is the multifamily parking, and they will access that. And I'll let Chuck and Housing Studio kind of address that a little bit more as they move into their project. Next slide. So one of the first things we did, knowing that Morrison Drive already is a fairly wide street, we wanted to back the building up off of the street and create a more kind of urban appropriate edge to the building. And by doing so, we were able to activate the street front with a cafe that'll be on the ground level and an outdoor dining area that'll be open to the public. So moving the building back, we've tended to try and create our own little zoning standard to widen that street so it didn't feel so oppressive. And also, as I get into the elevations a little bit later, we'll go through some of the design principles. But this level really serves kind of the access point for valet drop-off, where they'll take your car on the Charleston Water System site. There's a jump lobby that takes you into the elevators to the roof where our main check-in is, and then the cafe and kitchen on the north side of the building, as you can see in the plan. So next slide. Level 2 essentially is serves back of house needs from pump rooms, fire command rooms, being that this is a high rise, generator spaces, admin, makeup of the balance of the meeting space that we can't fit on the roof because we have a 6,000 square foot meeting space requirement by zoning. And this level really kind of serves a multitude of uses. Next slide. Levels 3 through 8 make up the balance of our guest rooms. Ultimately, as we move forward with the hotel brand throughout the development of the project, room mix might change slightly, but the room quantity and count will not, which won't affect our zoning submittal nor the parking requirements that we've been asked to meet and required to meet by prior approvals. Next slide. The roof level plan, really on the sheet east side, we have a pool for hotel guests, and we also have an outdoor dining area, which connects to a interior restaurant, which will also be open to the public. Just to the right of the elevators is where our lobby will be. So you'll come into the ground floor, have your vehicle taken by the valet attendant, and then you will immediately be directed to the roof so that you have views of bridge and downtown. To the left of the restaurant and the main bathrooms, for the upper level, we have our meeting space, which includes pre-function areas and a boardroom. And then also on the north side of the plan, we have the main kitchen for the hotel to serve the meeting spaces, the restaurant, the outdoor dining, and the guest rooms. Next slide. And a roof plan, which mechanically, obviously, will screen mechanical units that are on the roof. We are proposing for them to be collected in an arrangement in the center of the building that will make them least visible from the street level. So moving into the building section, I believe that the building is considered a high rise. This really kind of shows the progression of the levels. We have a standard room level from levels 3 through 8. We have a higher volume on the roof because we have spaces that require more ceiling height, meaning conference spaces because of that requirement. And from a proportion standpoint, from an interior perspective, it affects the exterior as much as the exterior affects the interior. On the ground level, we have a 2-level lobby cafe space that will be open basically to the second floor, and then a little bit higher volume on the second floor. Next slide. So some of the precedents, I don't really look at precedent buildings so much as I look at inspirational kind of language that I like to use in buildings. And so, if you look at some of these, it talks about more of a texture, quality, and nature approach, direction that you can take in a building. And you won't necessarily find these directly applied, but they'll be subtly applied so that we can take this language, this pattern, and then infuse it in our building in a way in which there is no definitive start or stop to the building, but all the elements blend together. So as you move around the building, we've tried to create a cohesive design that has relationship. So the east elevation relates to the west, the north relates to the south, the north relates to the west, so on and so forth. And there's always a memory in the building that you can find that kind of transitions in and around. Some of the BAR principles are higher ground floors, which allow more natural light. We've tried to do that. We've also tried to set back the main hotel entry. If you were to access the elevator lobbies down a colonnade on the south side of the property, we're looking at things like interlacing, light, transition, connection, scale, and reflection, and gradient. Next slide. And then we move into the elevations. And black and white line drawings aren't necessarily the best, but they do give a sense of what the building is. And, as we looked at pushing the building back, we also looked at creating these two masses that are juxtaposed against themselves and slightly shifted to kind of create narrower frontages to the Morrison Drive and not have such a wider building with, it's harder to deal with proportions. So that really tends to start to reinforce the vertical elements and nature that the VR principles asked for. Next slide. So rendered view of the Morrison Drive elevation, and what you see is, in terms of breaking the floors down, we've tried to do some interlace and play. We've tried to group and gang the floors, not as a series of floors that are represented individually, but try to collect multiple floors to really drive a vertical portion of the building. The white that you see there is proposed to be a GFRC, fiber reinforced concrete material that would be smooth finish, and then metal panel at the slab edge covers that just kind of give an accent to the slab edges themselves. As you can tell, you'll see, I'll gloss over more, but you can tell that we're bringing glass in and up and around and really trying to make that connected to the ground level, to the upper level, and then around the corner so that the building has kind of a dynamic flow about it. Next slide. Looking at the south elevation, there's a lot of that language starts to get translated to the south elevation. But then when we talk about break and transition, here above the main drive entrance, we've created a different element that would be kind of a curtain wall moment, because everything else we've been able to design within the parameters of storefront largely. But how do we transition from one side to the other? How do we create gradient in the building? Next slide. And then you can see that, certain portions of the building we're keeping really glassy, but those portions that are further withdrawn into the site where we have the terrace garden are starting to be a little more responsive to cost in some ways and create a design that is still dynamic but provides less glazing to wall percentage. And on the roof level, you see how we're talking about transitions of pattern on the rear, patterns in the front, and then how the bridge shift starts to overlap itself to move from the conferencing into the restaurant and into the exterior dining. Next slide. This is the north elevation, which is the side that would face the CWS site. Next slide. We tried to pay close attention to not giving over to this being just the service side of the project. We do have some admin spaces that are occurring back here, so we tried to really think about how do we bring natural light in there, but still make it cohesive and kind of part of the design. Next slide. And then just kind of a view looking north, looking northeast. You can see that, from a street, level, pulling the building back really kind of gives it a nice presence on the street, and you can kind of see the multifamily design. But we really tried to create a building that felt light on its feet, not very heavy, something that would be, a contributor to Charleston architecture from a contemporary standpoint, something that would be a model. And I hope this development could be used as a model, because as Eddie mentioned, we could have had, by the zoning allowance, one large building that's wrapping, parking structure. We really went to a lot of trouble to really pull these buildings apart, to create these isolated projects that relate and speak well to one another and create this kind of public realm that is kind of central to the whole project. Next slide, Morris. This is a view looking from Morrison across the elevated courtyard, down the colonnade to the hotel entrance in the near the valley drop-off, but also the main entrance to the cafe. Next slide. And then a little bit more view looking to the northwest. Next slide. And then a view looking southeast. Next slide. This is a view as you're driving towards Mount Pleasant, right as you kind of get on the Meeting Street ramp, looking north or southeast. Next slide. This is looking southwest from the north side of the Jersey barrier. Next slide. And then again, you know, just trying to think about where people are going to engage this building, and on the ground floor, on the terraces that we have on the roof, any kind of public engagement, we're proposing to use something that has more of a, it would be a composite material, because it's just for a building of this size. From a maintenance standpoint, it wouldn't be prudent to use a really natural material, so we're using something that has a warmth to it that's relatable, that makes it more human, more understandable, more relatable. But then elsewhere, you know, we're going back to those elements that are, you know, metal panel, GFRC, and those things that won't necessarily be available to touch by the occupant. Next slide. And then just a slide, which is always a nice shot. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Public comment on this agenda. Mr. Schweb.
Good evening, I'm Justin Schwebler of the Historic Charleston Foundation. We'd first like to thank the applicants for taking the time to meet with us at several points over the last few months as this project has developed. And we'd also like to commend the team for taking comments from city staff and modifying the designs to try and accommodate their recommendations prior to this application. That being said, Historic Charleston Foundation is opposed to the design in its current state. While this project is within the UP zoning district, that does not guarantee an applicant's right to develop a 12-story building. The maximum height for a structure in the UP district is 4 stories, unless the height incentive points have specified in the zoning ordinance for livability and sustainability have been achieved. The board is being asked to approve a hotel that has 4 extra stories and a multifamily project with 8 extra stories, with none of the contributions for sustainability or the public realm specified in that application that would justify the additional height. While we are opposed to the height, scale, mass, and architectural direction of the hotel and multifamily project, we feel we cannot address these issues until justification for their existence is included in the application. We therefore recommend denial of the application as submitted, with a note from the board that all applications in the UP district must include specific details on how their height incentives have been achieved in compliance with the ordinance if they wish to build higher than 4 stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schweb. Ms. Finnegan.
I'm Finnegan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We appreciate the applicant meeting with us on several occasions and keeping us updated on progress of the project's development. Generally, we feel this is a very strong start to the design. It incorporates many elements that we advocate for in new development, including high-quality, authentic materials, simple, repetitive forms, and strong vertical proportions. Further, the relationship to Charleston's urban patterns is reinforced by orienting the narrow vertical end of the building to the street and pulling the mass into the site. We find a clearly articulated base, middle, and top, as well as the depth of the details, and few but significant moves in the massing and facade articulation to be very effective. However, with a clean and simple approach to the design, its success will highly depend on the execution of the material application and craftsmanship of the construction. So we encourage careful attention at the more detailed stages of review, but at this point, we are pleased to lend our support for conceptual approval.
Thank you, Ms. Finnegan. Further public comment on this agenda? Okay. City staff comments or recommendations?
I will start with some observations about this item and the following item. Staff has worked with the applicant since earlier this summer, and applicants have been responsive. Therefore, staff has more observations than comments, which we would like to reiterate. The project handles the massing of the hotel and multifamily portions as 4 distinctively separate buildings, similar language, thereby answering to the concern, which we often struggle with, of inserting massively large buildings to the landscape. The concept handles another challenge of larger projects by varying parking and utilitarian services. Shifting these functions out of view allows for the vehicular entry to be a plaza space that is seamless and open for people, supported by textures and landscaping, and not restricted for vehicles only. The concept of the plaza is carried all the way through the project via a series of terraced gardens with adjacent amenity spaces. All right, and specific to this project, number 1, while not substantial in the traditional sense, the building space is tall and graceful and provides cover at the ground level. The building's top is similarly slightly subtractive. 2, vertical proportions are evident in the framework, which is proud of the glazing and metal panels and also in the window patterns. 3, the ceiling and wood grain at the ground floor colonnade provides warmth. The corner windows provide a flourish. The tapered fin against Morrison is a nod to the streetscape. These playful elements help to enliven the crisp and rhythmic lines of the building. These should continue to be enhanced and studied. And last, as noted, while the vehicular plaza is very open and porous to people and activity, consider additional tightening through relocating the flush curb and bollards to make this more pedestrian friendly over vehicles and to encourage access to the terrace gardens. The recommendation is conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Anyone on the applicant's team care to respond?
Yeah, I would like to make just one general comment in response to the concern about the zoning for the district. And we have actually submitted to TRC for review and have presented how we're achieving all of our UP points. This project will incorporate Charleston Rises, which is this city-based sustainability program, which we're very excited about. So that makes a large portion of that. We're working through the mobility fund. Overall, the project in general has over 1.5 acres of improvements to the public realm, and these are quality improvements. So we're just completing a rail spur project, which will be a new waterfront park for the east side. And so we just completed a DCC for that site, and we'll be closing next month to kick that off with the Charleston Parks and Service Agency. So just wanted to respond to that one comment more that dealt with zoning, and it we can achieve this.
Thank you. And that's within limited purview, but you did give clarification of something that I think is relative from a procedural standpoint. So thank you.
Yeah, so that's really what I was going to reiterate. That no project that's submitted to you guys that has to go through other agency review would be successful if you don't meet those requirements of the other review. And even though we've submitted and gotten approval by zoning at its original submittal and gone through TRC pre-app, we've submitted basically incentive points by the Upper Peninsula requirements that would allow us to go to 9 stories or higher. We can make the program work within 9 stories, so there's no need to add additional floors. But those points might change. But at no point would we ever submit this to zoning or permitting or for final review or approval without the requirement having been met. So I'd like to thank them for their comment, but I do have to say that those portions have previously been reviewed and approved by other agencies.
Thank you for that additional information. Board comments, potential vote.
Well, I really do appreciate the depth of study that went into the site plans. You're a little boxed into it because you have a relatively narrow site. A lot of those sites are just big old, pizza box shaped things. And West Edge is probably one of the greatest examples of failure in that regard. And I think all of that project and others like it are often on people's minds, the public, when they see a project like this come before the board. But I am not concerned at all about the apparent height of these buildings. This one in particular, I think the proportions and scale of it is absolutely perfect. And I appreciate the care and attention to the facades. When the UP zoning came into effect, there was a presumption that it would introduce a more, I hate to label it as contemporary, but a new breath of architectural fresh air into the Upper Peninsula. There was never any suggestion that it would be a replication of the 18th and 19th century building patterns that we so appreciate down here. And that was first tested with the Charleston Tech Center, which I made comment on earlier, but the reason that architecture looks as it does is because the UP zoning encouraged that. So in my view, from the aspect of height, mass, and scale, this building is exactly what the zoning ordinance is asking people to do. And the architectural direction is exactly right for dealing with the implications of the zoning. So I support the project.
This application is the most successful presentation I think that I have seen in this the area, Upper Morrison area. As Mr. White has mentioned, there are a lot of site constraints. I think in particular the base of the building is very attractive. I think the proportions are right. I generally share in his comments. And as any member of the public who wishes to understand this can understand, zoning is not within the purview of this board. This is a very unique area of the city. We would call some of the projects in that area failures. I think this distinctly would be in the category of things that could be a great success, at least based on what we've been presented tonight. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with something that someone said earlier. The real success will be when it's done and built well, and that's when we can gauge its success. But I like it, and when my attention goes to that frame, the frame that you see, and it's gentle. It just feels good. You know, whether it's 6 stories or 9 stories, it feels good. I want to ask you a question that probably everybody knows but me, but I just want to, because I don't know the answer. But if we were to go to slide 8, 24, 29, or 36, any of those, my comments were based on 24, yeah, my comments are based on, so when you look at this one, and you see the contrast of that frame and what's behind it, is this like a nighttime shot?
Yeah.
So if we were to go to the other ones, if we went to 29 or 24, same thing?
What's that?
Nighttime shot or?
No, this is the daytime shot.
So we're really gonna see that contrast in those materials. Yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you, Mr. Bettis. Further board comment?
I think to me it's building is stunning. I really appreciate that we are going this contemporary route, and the proportions are well done, and it has some feel of the Charleston in a very contemporary way. Is this verticality, the ratio of openness, and you know, this is maybe one of those gateway rooms we are looking at traveling on the overpass. I guess the fact that the project had ability to have the surface parking has helped not to get this wraparound building. So it's kind of almost given, so that you are lucky that way.
I was going to say, I think the developers got lucky in having a parking solution that many other architects do not have.
Exactly.
And I also back up Luda's comments that we've got a clear podium, middle, nice cap. They're very clean in that regard. Further board comment.
And I think the ground level is very inviting, and you know, the way how it's handled, the entrance and exit of the vehicle, you almost got the Lombard Street here with the estacade, and but it's also talks to the Morrison Drive, which is similar. So it's like continuation of the same development, but with different means and vocabulary. So I really appreciate it.
Further board comment.
I'll agree with a lot of what is said. I think it's a very elegant building. I appreciate the engagement along the streetscape with the public and the auto and people plaza, Mr. Miller put it earlier. I will always say that I think it's too high in personal and understanding the context of sloping down into the highway. the applicant mentioned that we expect this to be a building that you won't always see when you're passing by. And I think that they will see it, and they should see it because it's architecturally interesting. But when you begin to disengage the people from the landscape, that's bothersome to me. And I think that the height does that. When you're coming off the bridge, you're not going to be able to see the horizon. Smarter people than me have said that you can't separate the landscape from its people, and I agree with that. But I think overall it is a nice project. Just wish that it would be.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any further board comments or motions?
I'll introduce a motion for conceptual approval with board and staff comments, which I think were consistent and compatible enough that we don't need to parse them.
So Mr. White's motion is for conceptual approval, incorporating board and staff comments. I have a second from Ms. Sobchak, correct? All right. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Matters?
Yay.
Ms. Sobchak? Mr. White?
Yay.
And myself, yay in favor. Make it excellent.
How much the glass cost? It's off the record.
Agenda item number 9, part and parcel of really agenda item number 8, 860 Morrison Drive, Morrison Yard, Phase 3, multifamily.
So this is the, actually, we'll wait till the other.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, this is the other portion of the project. This is the multifamily. Again, this is the construction, UP zoning, Stewart Corridor District, and they are requesting conceptual approval for the construction of a multifamily building with structured parking and garage. Mr. Travis, can I kick this one off? Oh, right? Oh, we have some I'm sorry. We have an error message and we have context.
Lawrence can fix the
Sorry.
error message, and then we'll let Tori walk us through the context slides.
That you're going to be really familiar with now.
Yeah. There we go.
And this is the location, everyone. And we can fly through the context. There's the existing project to the south. There we go. Okay.
Very good. Applicant has the floor.
Mr. Chair and Board, thank you so much for your time tonight. As Eric said, we're really excited about this project. And Tori and Lawrence, I'm going to thank you for the amount of time that you've spent with us to date, because obviously we feel like it's been very successful working with you and the various stakeholders that we've been talking to and being informed by. I'm Chuck Travis. I'm the principal of the Housing Studio. This is Alberto Ceballos, who is also going to be participating in this presentation. We quickly want to introduce our design team. Rick Kamakaris is our project architect that's going to be working on this and also worked on Morrison Yard Phase 1. We have two folks from Simeon & Whitesides, Malcolm Glenn, who's our civil engineer, and then Katie Sailors, who you have already seen some of her work, landscape architect of this project. Extremely talented folks, and I'm very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to work with. Lawrence, we're going to try to make this fairly succinct. If you'll move to the diagram that shows the zoning map. Not so much that I want to talk about the zoning. No, go back one, please. Because you already know that we're in the UP. Because I really want to talk as a designer more about context and what informs us as the designer. And I know we talked about the built environment, what's next to us, and essentially what's still in the process of being built. But equally as important, if not more so, which we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about, is our connection to the river. And the river really has informed us, and perhaps those views to the river, which you mentioned earlier in your comments, about how do you actually tie to the landscape? How do you actually acknowledge the marsh and acknowledge the river and also acknowledge the built context? So I think this diagram clearly illustrates where we're positioned and how we have the opportunity to do those types of things. If you'll go, keep just progressing forward, please. I'm looking for the height that Eddie showed earlier. That one. Just that you see our built environment. Obviously, you know Morrison Yard, phase 1, that's under construction. That building at its highest point is about 122 feet. The office building is under construction is 166. The height of our project will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 148 feet. We'll continue forward, please. And you know, you've heard we've gone through various charrette processes. If you just keep moving once. What I'm looking for now, thank you right there, is to talk about our party, which is what we spent an enormous amount of time. And this really represents the key components that I think have driven the design of this entire project. If you look at our site, you know exactly where it is, and you know that if you get the additional UP points, which we are going to be doing Charleston rises, and we will be having workforce housing, among other things that we'll be doing, is that represents a mass that's 12 stories in height. If you start looking through the diagrams, you're going to see how we obviously thought of Morrison Drive as being extremely important, and also the scale of what's happening along Morrison Drive that starts to sculpt what this can become. Next slide, please. And then going back to my conversation about the river and the connection to it, obviously is fused to the river, is fused through the buildings, and how we actually take these components and start breaking them down into the various stages that can work together, or various buildings that can work together. And perhaps one of the most significant moments that we had was because we had a conversation with Tori through email, was diagram number 7. As you can see, the building, because the program used to be much larger. As you look at diagram number 8, we started to lose that wing, primarily because that wing represented more density, but it also blocked views from the crosstown corridor and to the river, and having that connection to the river, back to those folks that are driving on a daily basis and on an occasional basis from Charleston towards Mount Pleasant and vice versa. We started to realize what a great opportunity we have and how we really have to respect it. And then to the point where we actually started even chamfering edges of buildings more to create more views and open up corridors, and really understanding how we're connecting not just from Morrison towards the river, but also in multiple directions. So go to the next slide, please. We'll just fast forward to the next diagram. And what this diagram really represents is that there's various stages of height and density that we're dealing with. As you know, the retail that's adjacent to us, that's currently under construction at the office building, is somewhere around 2 stories in height. We have an element in our building that comes out to face the street that's 2 stories in height, which is about 25 feet. It steps to 7 stories, which then steps to 8 stories. What informed that is because the hotel that's adjacent to us, which is 9 stories, really wanted to have views because their amenity and reception desk and all those things are going to be on the 9th floor. We were blocking views to the historic town or city that they wanted to have. And so that started informing how we started to push and modulate these buildings even more. And then as you move further back into the site, that's where the 12-story components come into play. And you can also see how we started working with the building mass itself to address the river and essentially have a gradation of scale and mass and just create a product and such. And we'll turn it over to Albert.
So, Lawrence, could we show slide 42, please? This is something that was really important to us, and it was creating a base that actually hit all the services, trash, moving, and services within the podium. And we wanted to create this pedestal element. And we got inspiration from the rampart walls that you see in Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter, where you have this beautiful masonry wall that elevates an elevated terrace. And you can see it here pretty well, how that base is really, our buildings are sitting delicately on top of that base. And that base peels off in relationship to Morrison Drive, and that's where we're gonna have our boutique leasing place at. And it's something that we really wanted to do too is to bring nature into these terraces. So every time we have a break between buildings, there is nature that rolls over into the space. In this case, in Morrison Drive, we have the terraces that roll down into the courtyard. If you go to the number 46, on this. And then the same thing applies to all the faces of the building. There's actually breaks into that modern rampart wall where we actually have green screens that break that and create really more of a vertical type aesthetic as it relates to the buildings above. And if you can go back to 29, you can just stop it there, that's fine. So then you can start seeing how that rampart wall really relates and becomes a pedestal, a base to the buildings, and the relationship of the buildings that sit on top of that base delicately with these colonnades that wrap around the buildings, which act as a base of the buildings. Then you have the body of the building, and then the penthouse levels become the very top of the building, which is a modern interpretation of a classical building layout. There is also, we really love to spend time in the space between the buildings because we think that that's the most important thing. And we really love the landscape that, Katie and the team are starting to craft and design. So there's a lot of different little interesting connections between the buildings. There's bridges that do some really delicate things and connect the buildings. There is, we needed a staircase, and you can see it there on the right side of the project to connect our project to the parking, the surface parking on the CWS side. And what we wanted to create, because that was such an important architectural element of the building, we actually wanted to create something that was sculptural in nature. We went and we worked with a kinetic artist, and we were inspired by the grasses and the marshes around, how the wind actually blew around the marshes. And I don't know if we can show the video of it. So we knew there was really, this building had to be interesting because it was so close to the bridge. And we really wanted to create something that just really wrapped up those marshes and actually became an extension of nature within the architectural skin, which plays with the whole nature within the courtyard scheme that we have. We have this second video. So then the gardens, the green walls, the terraces, and the skins of the actual building really start becoming an extension of nature, an extension of the marshes, an extension of the banks of the river. We can go back to the renderings.
So we have our landscape team, civil engineering team here if you have questions for them. Obviously our architectural team will want to have to answer anything you might have as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Public comment on this agenda item.
Karen Lettigan with Preservation Society of Charleston. First, we would like to thank the applicant for meeting with us to discuss this project and being receptive to our comments. This is a significant gateway site, and we have learned lessons from recent development just to the south of Morrison Drive. about how consequential decisions made in the design review process can be. It's critical to get this project right. While we are appreciative of efforts made by the applicant to reduce the scale of the project by breaking up the building into distinct masses, we feel the architecture needs significant restudy that warrants deferral. The biggest issue is the lack of hierarchy in the facades and confusion of proportions. There should be better definition in the building's base, middle, and top. The horizontal elements should be de-emphasized to create better vertical proportions, and the number of facade expressions should be simplified as you move around the building. The building frame also feels very heavy, and there are too many uncomfortable voids. On a more specific note, the base of the building feels disjointed from the floors above, and there's too much separation created by the intermediate pedestal. The top of the building similarly feels unrefined and needs significant development, especially since this will be a highly visible fixture of the skyline. On Morrison Drive, we do feel the one-story zinc-clad building has potential to be an interesting ground floor element, but it's currently underscaled and uninviting. The building frame should be lengthened and lightened, and more glazing should be incorporated. The brick wall that encircles much of the rest of the property and is most visible from the rear also feels very fortress-like and is incongruous with the character of the rest of the project. Other treatment options should be studied. Finally, we would like to point out the lack of meaningful green space that the ordinance clearly calls for in the UP district. While we feel the terrace presents an interesting design solution, we are concerned the buildings will form a cavern effect that will prevent dynamic use of this space. Unfortunately, we feel the apartment proposal is not yet at the level of quality that was previously reviewed for the hotel design, and significant restudy is needed on the architecture. This will be one of the most impactful projects for Charleston, and it's crucial to uphold the highest standard of review. Therefore, we urge the board to defer the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Further public comment?
Justin Schwebler of the Historic Charleston Foundation. I'd just like to reiterate our comments previously of Historic Charleston being opposed to this project based on height, scale, mass, and architectural direction. And for clarification, our previous comments, we had asked for justification for that point system to earn the additional height, and those were not provided to us. But for the architectural direction, we don't feel that there's been enough contributions to the public realm that, again, is required in that ordinance based on the current design. We would recommend removal of the kind of fortified base facsimile and the removal of the spa kinetic feature on the north side of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Schweb. Further public comment on this agenda item? City staff comments and recommendations?
Okay. Number one, as noted in the previous agenda item, the overall project is articulated as 4 separate buildings with activation elements along Morrison Drive, into the vehicle plaza, and all the way through the project. The multifamily project occupies 3 buildings, which makes each mass smaller than many of its peers. The height is contextual with its Morrison Yard neighbors. The project carefully pulls height and mass back to protect the view shed of the bridge from the Septima Clark Parkway. The relationship between the multifamily buildings is driven by the overall concept of connected terrace gardens and public spaces from Morrison Drive all the way through the project. These are tied together via the gardens as well as bridge elements. 2, related to Morrison Drive, the project's elements are placed at a slight angle to the street, which creates a stepping condition and giving interest to the streetscape. 3, the language of the multifamily portions complements the hotel with a much more vertical and less blocky language than Morrison Yard Phase 2. The chamfered corners have reason and purpose, recognizing that the view between buildings is important. The chamfered corners are purposeful, the angled bridge elements and corner windows are flourishes, zinc panels provide warmth, and the sculptural kinetic wall provides movement and interest for the visible north side. All of these elements enliven the crisp and rhythmic lines of buildings, and they are important and should continue to be enhanced and studied. 5, as noted, while the vehicular plaza is very open and porous to people and activity, consider additional tightening through relocating the flush curb and bollards to make this more pedestrian friendly over vehicles and to encourage access to the terrace gardens. And 6, for purposes of giving guidance for the next review, the board should provide feedback on the element which includes the sculptural kinetic wall. This element, while housing amenity space, may be viewed as public art or as part of the overall composition or as both. This determination may influence the level of connection to the project and any revisions to its exterior. With that, we're recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any response from the applicant? Okay, all right. Board comments and a potential vote on this agenda item.
One question for the applicant. The kinetic feature, the videos, were those of a mock-up specific to this project or just of a similar concept?
There were specific to this project. We took a drone and sent the videos of the marshes. The kinetic artist in San Francisco created
Okay, very good.
You can see the drone shots as part of it.
Yeah, okay.
Further board comments?
Is that all you have?
No, go ahead.
No.
Well, I would say that I think the party, and I love it when folks use the word party. That was like hammered in my brain at Auburn. And since there are no Auburn grads in Charleston, we don't hear that word. But I know, but taking that mass and breaking it up as it is and connecting with bridges is truly very successful. And even the sort of the massive sort of masonry base that it all sits on, that doesn't bug me because it's going to be facing the river predominantly. And although I do really think that the middle and the top of the building just feel very heavy and dark to me. And I think a lot of it has to do with some of the points that the Preservation Society made about that there's not the sort of, well, it would be a pretty good with vertical proportions. It has a very distinct egg crate look to me right now. And I think that being so tall, at 148 feet, this is an opportunity to be very expressive with the top of the building. And those two things are critical to this. So I would actually, even though I really like the overall premise of the project and the direction that I know it's head, I am trending towards.
Because my thoughts are very much in line with yours, to say this is what I think is right. I think the way the building is broken down is correct, and I think that the height, scale, and mass is wrong. It's right. Excuse me. What I'm concerned with is the general architectural direction, and particularly the fenestration on the podium. Mr. White's comments about it being dark concern me, and we've seen, fortunately or unfortunately, as the developers working on both of these properties, we've seen a project just prior to this that's been approved, and I think that the coloration, the fenestration, et cetera, of the multifamily project needs to complement, for better or worse, what we have just approved at a conceptual level. I know we're talking about different firms. Fortunately, we've got the same developer, but I think in terms of what you see in the visual aesthetic and the fenestration on these buildings that are so big, are going to have to be tied a little closer together. I agree with Mr. White's comments that I'm not so concerned about the base, fortress-like, or however you want to call it. I like some of the creative concepts with the kinetic sculpture. I just think that the middle tier of that building needs simplicity and fenestration and needs to be lightened up, and now has the concern of being, if possible, in a district where we have had lots of concerns about what the finished product was, something that is complementary to what appears to be a better project that we've seen in that area, if that makes sense. But as Mr. White says, I have no doubt this will get there. That's why I would lean towards a deferral as opposed to a denial, because I think that can get straightened out. Further board comments?
Yeah, it's same view on all these points. And to me, the middle portion and the base, they seem to be the same size. So there's kind of disconnect between there's two levels and the upper level. So it seems like different language altogether. Again, the base, the brick portion, that's sort of typical, and it's not bothering me, but the middle portion is it's not working altogether with the rest of the language. And again, yes, it, in some ways, it does work with the hotel because of the glazing and things like that, but the rhythm of the vertical and horizontal divisions are a little bit off. And I guess top floors need more study. But changing the heights of the different portions and in relationship is between all of them, it seems to be working well. So the party is, like you said, is working well. We're just talking about vocabulary and maybe some proportions of some parts. And because it's facing the Morrison Drive, is a little bit uninviting, that whole base right now.
Thank you, Ms. Socha. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, what I saw in preparation for this meeting and then looking at the presentation is the repetition is so obvious to me here, as it is in so many other projects that come through this board. The repetition, and to me, I think it jumps out because of the height of the building. So somehow figuring out how to deal with that, and the masonry, the vertical masonry wall, I guess, at the critical line that forms the outside of the parking area. I think that could be successful, and I get the studies that have been done to come up with that idea. But it's so large, it's as if it needs to have a step in it, so an offset or two offsets, so that there's some relief in that large, tall wall. And then on the, if I'm saying it right, the kinetic wall, if I'm saying that correctly, I don't know anything about that at all. And if before, I would think that's a good idea, and I'm sure you feel the same way. There's got to be places that's been used for 10 years or 5 years or whatever, and in a toxic environment like ours, what's the maintenance on that going to be like? What's it going to look like 5 years from now, 1 year from now? It affected now, but affected 5 years from now, and maybe that's not in our purview. I don't know, but I don't know anything about that.
Materials are definitely within our purview, and as a reminder for that kinetic wall, of what is it composed?
So it's stainless.
Stainless.
And glass, so they have to be light. It's a UV coated polycarbonate infused with silver pigments on it. So it's a true art color. It's not just a coating, but it's a true art color. So it's to be clear, I'm a big fan of that type of thinking and processing. But what comes along with that is, as you probably already have, is knowledge. And I'd like to get more of that knowledge about that system.
We're definitely going to want to see that system at some point. Yep, absolutely.
Very quickly, is it on the bridge side, on the east side, connected? And it's visible from the drive, right? So the reflection of the stainless steel is the dangerous.
The glass are the polycarbonate, so it's not quite reflective. Mostly what you're seeing just the shadows that change it.
Yeah, I would want to stop and look at it.
But I do like the elements. There are a lot of questions, but I do in fact like the element. Further board comment? Nothing from Mr. Brown. Anyone else?
You know, that piece of just being sort of out there on the edge of the marsh reminds me a whole lot of coal. You might want to ask the fabricator if he's familiar with hurricane wind loads.
Yes.
I can imagine that thing flapping away to Berkeley County.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jay.
I was going to introduce a motion unless anybody else had any further comments. All right, I'm going to introduce a motion for deferral for restudy of general architectural direction, particularly the middle and top of the building, and with board and staff comments.
Mr. White, your motion, as I've heard it, is deferral for restudy of general architectural direction, particularly the middle and top of the building, also incorporating board and staff comments. That's correct. Is there a second to Mr. White's motion? Mr. Matters, I'll run down the roll. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. Matters?
Yeah.
Ms. Socha? Mr. White?
Yeah, in favor.
And myself, yeah, in favor. We'll work through this together.
Thank you.
All right, we have two policy agenda items for the board, which probably don't interest the general public, but if they do, you're more than welcome to stay.
Unless you sell signs for a living.
I believe we're going to take a brief. Yep. We're going to, at this time, the board will briefly, I hope, go into executive session related to these two policy items. And then, yes, ma'am, it's part of that. I'll do that before we go in. Only if we need to. Okay. Actually, I take that back. We're going to take a brief break. And unless we have to go into executive session, we're going to proceed with our agenda. Please, everyone, please take a 5-minute restroom break.
So we're meeting here?
Water break. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We'll come back here. And everyone, please remember, we're still on the record.
So this is when you cuss everybody.
I never do that. I always assume I'm being recorded unless I'm in the confines of my office.
That you know of.
That's right. This guy's with me.
That's when I know that I am.
Thank
We
you
used
for
the word
sticking this
party
out.
a ton.
You know, it's funny. I just heard a thing like you don't hear that at all. And I started using that word when I first got on board. Richard Gow actually commented on it tonight. He was like, I haven't heard that word forever.
I had one professor from, I think UCLA. Anyway, he was my favorite. Not because he was from UCLA, but he was my favorite professor. He used it all the time.
Makes a lot of sense.
They're just the benefits, and what they said, what they didn't do the first time. I gather that the school district really did have to be in the neighborhood to make that properly. We have a better Jeff.
Nice to see you,
Yeah.
Jeff. Yes.
All that work out?
I'm trying to figure where we ended up on that. I think we have a mediation that we're still trying to schedule. We haven't pinned down a date yet. We're still kind of going back and forth.
Wait, which one is that?
Let me remind you that we're still live.
Yes, we're not going to discuss.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Was it Dr. or
Mr.
Roger? Okay. Well, thank you for coming down and talking to us about that. What I would tell you is that while the signage in and of itself is not the purview of the city, our excellent staff will pass that on, and it probably is good in a place like that, in a neighborhood like that, to have some interpretive signage so that people understand.
Well, yeah, we even have staff, they got to do in Raleigh, Durham.
Okay.
To bring, staff signage out like that, and also they make that part of the citizen science program. People can see if there's a problem and report it. It really activates the community.
Sure.
And, parking lots that have, impervious surfaces and, ways to collect rainwater, they tell people what it's all about.
Yeah.
And if there's something not functioning, you have somebody to report it to.
Well, and in this case, because this board cares a lot about history, the history you would want to document is the reason we have this giant lift station in this neighborhood is that over a 15-year period, we got to the point where we got water 5 feet deep in this intersection.
Yeah.
People are going to say, what's this all about? I was going to say, well, because 10 feet away, you had 6 feet of water. So thank you. That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you.
I think the pump station is great.
I don't like the nice price.
Yeah. I think the hotel design was very smart, not that
That's cool.
That's the one we can play when people come up and say, what's that like?
Yeah, like it on the shelf. Absolutely, that would be awesome.
Not the usual.
Why is it so cold here?
It's freezing in here.
Well, it was hot.
Because the boys were messing with
I'm starting to, I was thinking, what am I dressing up today?
I've been sitting here doing this.
Well, I didn't, it felt a little warm when we started.
Yeah, Luda, when we first got here, the men were burning up and you may have been comfortable, so we did something with the thermostat. I'm sorry if it was too cold. But
It
we
was
were hot
warm
when
then.
we
I
got here.
will admit.
I
You
will
did it.
start to bring.
You did a great job on your lift station presentation. That's gonna be a nice project. And as a big sailor, I can tell you, putting towel and paint on anything to hide dirt is a good idea. So I think putting that.
I'm gonna turn it back out.
Well, I don't know, I never used, in such.
So, you know.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be nice. While you were out of the room, we were talking about how that really is a public service project and how, what an enhancement it is for the neighborhood. Yes,
Yeah.
the lift station would be a nice part.
It's funny.
Maybe you feel it. Yeah, Hampstead Park is meant to be a unified.
What is it?
Yeah.
And that would create and I'm so pleased that DRC requires it.
Yeah.
We're removing all the.
Yeah, the colors are gonna be great. And we thank Mr. Ward again for his very relevant comment about having some signage that says the reason we have this lift station is because 10 feet away, we used to have 6 feet of water in the middle of the driving on. I think that's something people will forget. When all the flooding equipment comes online and the city's dry again, people are gonna say, what?
We need another video showing how it.
Yeah, what it looked like. All right, do we have it? Oh, see, here too. Let's do this. Good. Mr. Courtney, are you gonna present? Or Mr. Parrish?
Finish to the last one at VRS.
So it's the opinion of the chair. I was gonna say, it's the opinion of the chair that short and sweet will get us there. Okay.
The finish line.
Okay.
I was definitely. Hello, board. All right, so we're bringing back to you some sign policies. Sorry. Some sign policies. We're gonna first talk about the revised policy, which is the old and historic and old city district. You have with you both the current state of the policy, which was adopted by the ARS last week. And on the second page, in case you need to look through it, what's highlighted in blue, and I realize it's a little bit hard to read. Those were edits proposed at the August 25th VARS meeting. And then yellow is some comments that after we took those edits from VARS, we met with legal and we did have to take some out, but we thought a lot of their changes were very pertinent and good. And so what you have on the page one is the final version. And again, it has been adopted by VARS. So are there any questions about the policy for the old and historic and old city district?
Under this is old and historic district, right?
Yeah, do that first.
On number 3. I still object to and the minimum amount of information. So who's defining that?
The way our team defines it is extraneous info. So.
But extraneous info is defined after that, right? It says, and the minimum amount is necessary.
Yeah.
And then repetitive signs and extraneous information. So that's already covered.
Yeah.
So signs should contain the business name and the minimum amount of information. I still don't.
That particular provision has been in there since we first adopted the signage policy, and I don't think it's ever been a real contentious item. There was always that thing about extraneous information or the minimum amount of information necessary. It usually just gets distilled down to the business names.
Well, so that's why I'm asking, why don't we just put business name? Because We already have repetitive signs and extraneous information. Signs should contain the business. I don't know. Y'all wouldn't need me to vote in favor for it to still pass. But I just can't quite get my hands wrapped around why we can't say, if somebody's going to a business that's in this large building or medium-sized building, they know they're going to that business. It's most of the time not like you're out shopping somewhere and you see a description and then say, oh, I'm gonna go into that store. Now, I don't even know that to be true, but that's where I'm coming from.
Right. James, I know and understand and value your perspective about this one thing. The only thing that I would say is I'm willing to give the staff enough discretion, latitude there to figure out what beyond a business name might be not extraneous information. But I hear what you're saying and have consistently understood your objection.
And I make one more point on that. And Lawrence and Tori, when they are not here, then somebody else comes in, but they have that same freedom to use their own interpretation. And we're suggesting by approving this that, yeah, that's right.
I understand, and I share the concern that latitude has to be trusted to people who are going to exercise good discretion and good judgment. So that is an institutional concern we should all have with the city of Charleston. I agree. Further questions for Tori or comments?
I find it interesting that the ARS struck, which our responsibility is to safeguard.
Yes. I do. Because Magali wrote beautiful language. That was your phrase, right? Magali, I don't know if you all know Magali Creech.
Who's assistant legal counsel for the city.
Going to the executive session to discuss legal advice on them, I could do that, but otherwise, cool for me. As y'all are discussing it now.
I just find it curious, but I'm happy to move forward.
Yeah, they didn't really get into it deeply, but that it was a piece of one there.
There was discussion. Okay. I'm relying on legal counsel. That doesn't give me too much argument.
I do too. Kind of takes me back to what we were just talking about.
No, I understand. Yes. No, it's these powers have to be entrusted to the right people. There's no question. Further board comments, questions, or can I entertain a motion? And I would suggest we entertain an omnibus motion, even though these are two separate agenda items, to approve them at the same time.
I think we did this to death, and there always will be room to improvement in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else that we've done. The best laid plans of mice and men. We might have weaknesses or challenges in this, as Mr. Metters has pointed out, and when we do, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We know that we need a policy now, that this is an exigent issue, and if we have to pivot, I'm sure we will have the ability to come together and pivot. That's all I can say.
Is there any objection about what
No, sir. I was just making a suggestion. So right now we are on agenda item number 10. And so let's take up just agenda item number 10 at Mr. Metter's suggestion and comfort level.
I'll introduce a motion to approve as submitted.
Okay. And Luda has seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Metters. Got it. Passes 4-1. Agenda item number 11. With things for future consideration duly noted from Mr. Metters. Mr. Metters, in 10 years, you can all come back and say, I told you so. We'll see.
We will not have signage then anyways.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Everything will be.
I hope, actually, that may be the solution to our problem. Everybody's plugged into the phone instead of looking around for signs. That's right.
Or it will be here, right?
Yes. Agenda item number 11. Ms. Parrish, you have the floor.
That is the new sign policy statement for the historic corridor district. This one has similar edits as, from what you saw before on the last agenda item. The blue are some DARS comments or edits or questions or revisions, and then yellow are some notes from the following day from staff table. What questions do you have about this one? Number 3. Number 3 is the same.
So, number 1, and I'm not sure why we don't require sign package at the end instead of saying it's strongly encouraged, that it's required. Number 3 is the same comment as the previous, which is the same only. And then the third is really just because I don't know. But and item number 4, sign materials should be compatible with those of the building, historic or not, should not obscure. Get down to point. Well, let me just keep reading. Illuminated signs will only be considered if they are muted in tone and brightness. Where the submission demonstrates the sign is to be harmonious with the building in its context and aesthetically congruous with the size of the building. External sign illumination is to be a neutral white. And so my question is that the pinnacle sign?
Well, external sign illumination, y'all mean signs that are externally illuminated, like with a gooseneck that points back at them.
Yeah, externally illuminated is, has a separate physical incandescent or other light projecting onto the sign.
I got
Is
that.
that correct?
But it's the next sentence. Only internal sign illumination, which identifies the buildings, may be allowed. Color illumination signs will be considered for internal sign illumination. So I'm saying that is the pinnacle. That's a case-by-case basis that it could be allowed.
Okay, yeah, on a case basis.
So that pinnacle sign is an example of we could have approved that.
Well, I would rely on, of course, this is conjectural, but I would rely on point number 1, that the sign should respect the architectural character of the building.
And I would say that next sentence, sorry, Jay, to interrupt, that should, it's immediate surroundings. I'm willing to consider the immediate surroundings to be the skyline, right?
I think what you're asking is, how is it actually lit? How are they proposing it lit?
No. I mean, this says that it could, on a case-by-case basis, can be internally lit, right? So, I mean, if staff felt like on that building, it was okay for that pinnacle sign to be illuminated at the top, it could be approved.
It could be. And it's not completely foreclosed.
That's my point, and that's worrisome. But I'm not expressing anything new. And all illuminated signs to be reviewed and approved by the city architect before an approval is entered into the company. So it means, again, these approval authorities are based on, it's subjective. There's some guidelines here, but it's still subjective. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, those are all, everything you stated, I think, is accurate.
And I think that point 6 about it being reviewed and approved by the city architect is important based on the histories of other city officials approving signs.
That part wasn't on me. I got that. But.
Other comments or questions at this time? Not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Metters noted. And thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this concludes our meeting. Thank you all for your patience and hard work this evening. Magali, thank you for sticking around. I'm glad we didn't have any fireworks. Being superfluous tonight.
You're gonna go back. You're gonna go back to the office tomorrow.
What the hell did those people talk about?
Lawrence, you did great with the tech back and forth tonight. I'm glad it didn't hang up on you.
Yeah, it worked.
6 hours?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes. I believe you're worried about Hampstead. I was worried about 860 Morrison, and it just never goes.
All right. Well, we're ready for it. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Tori. Do you have parking vouchers?
Well, I feel like I'm going to be.
Does Lawrence?
Next time.
Yeah.
Thank you guys again.
Oh, John.
Yeah, this is great.
See what happens?
I love this.
Yeah, it's considerably large with that. Is it electrical unit
Yes.
around the side? Like,
If you want to just email them to me tomorrow, I can throw them out.
There's several components
Yeah.
sticking out. Really.